Chapter 1885 Yielding Again. Chapter 1885 Yielding Again. To Alchemy Apprentice Mo, giving in to Ling Han was also a great humiliation. He was actually lowering his head to someone who had beaten him up and humiliated him. Just thinking about this made him feel stifled. However, he had already displeased Alchemist Zicheng once, so could he fail his task again? He couldn't endure Alchemist Zicheng's wrath. Ling Han smiled faintly and said, My legs feel so sore." He retrieved a chair and sat down. He then crossed his legs, and his intentions were as clear as could be. He wanted Alchemy Apprentice Mo to massage his legs. Holy fuck! How overbearing! Everyone's heart thumped upon seeing this. Ling Han was far too audacious. He actually wanted Alchemy Apprentice Mo to massage his legs. One had to realize that he served Grandmaster Zicheng. Was Ling Han viewing himself as Grandmaster Zicheng II? Alchemy Apprentice Mo's face flushed red with anger. "You're taking things too far. Way too far. Ling Han, aren't you going to leave yourself a path of retreat?" he questioned loudly. He felt incredibly vexed. "What have I done?" Ling Han asked in a calm voice. Indeed, Ling Han hadn't said anything at all. Everything was simply Alchemy Apprentice Mo's own interpretation and understanding. However, who didn't understand Ling Han's intentions? Alchemy Apprentice Mo gritted his teeth and asked, "Is this your condition?" Ling Han smiled and didn't say anything. Alchemy Apprentice Mo almost exploded with anger. However, he had no option but to forcefully suppress his anger, contemplating what he had to gain and lose. In the past, he had also acted on Alchemist Zicheng's orders to invite other people. Which of them hadn't been as excited as a monkey to receive Alchemist Zicheng's invitation? Thus, they had only known how to thank him profusely. That being the case, he had also seized the opportunity to ask for some benefits from them. However, Ling Han was an exception. He had directly targeted and provoked him. Upon thinking of this, Alchemy Apprentice Mo truly started to feel regretful. If his attitude toward Ling Han had been even an iota better, none of this would have ever happened. Unfortunately, however, he had treated Ling Han like he had treated those people in the past. Time could be sped up, but it couldn't be reversed. Thus, he had no opportunity to change his previous choices. If he failed to complete Alchemist Zicheng's order again, it was extremely likely that he would lose his favor. What did this signify? Alchemy Apprentice Mo was well aware of what would happen. Although many people wanted to befriend him and curry favor with him, this was simply because he was Alchemist Zicheng's alchemy apprentice. However, he had also offended heaven knew how many people. Once he lost his status, what would await him? He would definitely be killed by his enemies. Upon thinking of this terrifying possibility, Alchemy Apprentice Mo couldn't help but shudder in fear. He gritted his teeth and slowly walked forward. It can't be, right? Is Alchemy Apprentice Mo truly yielding? Everyone was transfixed with shock and disbelief upon seeing this. As it turned out, this person was truly a sheep in wolf's clothing. In the past, they had all been fearful of him because of his status. In reality, however, he was nothing but a paper tiger. They all came to a sudden realization. It was because of their extreme care and reverence toward Alchemist Zicheng that they had even treated Alchemy Apprentice Mo as a high and mighty being. In reality, however, he was nothing more than a mere alchemy apprentice. Just how profound and powerful was Alchemist Zicheng? Would he truly be affected by a measly alchemy apprentice? Would his decisions truly be influenced by a measly alchemy apprentice? Alchemy Apprentice Mo arrived beside Ling Han. Forcefully enduring the humiliation, he then bent down and started to massage Ling Han's legs. Ling Han didn't tell him to stop, so Alchemy Apprentice Mo continued to massage his legs. Only after an hour did Ling Han finally stretch and say, My legs don't feel sore anymore. Let's take a walk." Alchemy Apprentice Mo breathed a sigh of relief. However, there was an ominous glint hidden deep in his eyes. Once he completed Alchemist Zicheng's order, he would definitely teach Ling Han a lesson. If he didn't torture Ling Han into questioning life, his surname wouldn't be Mo. Ling Han noticed this, and he couldn't help but smile and say, "I've been frightened by your expression, so it's probably best if I rest here for a while longer. I need some time to compose myself." He returned to his seat. "Fuck your sister." Alchemy apprentice Mo almost spat a mouthful of blood. "You can't toy with me like this. I only just finished massaging your legs in public, so you can't do this to me again." He silently cursed himself. Why had he revealed his killing intent just then? More importantly, his killing intent had actually been seen by Ling Han. "It's best not to keep Grandmaster Ziqing waiting," he hurriedly said. Although this sounded like advice, it was actually more of a plea. Alchemy apprentice Mo stopped just short of saying, "Grandpa, stop messing with me." Ling Han cast a long and meaningful glance at Alchemy apprentice Mo. Only when Alchemy apprentice Mo's heart started to thump wildly against his chest did he finally say, "All right, let's get going." Alchemy apprentice Mo hurriedly rushed over to help Ling Han up. His actions were so respectful and obsequious that everyone couldn't help shake their heads. At this moment, did Alchemy apprentice Mo still possess a shred of pride and arrogance? Sure enough, evil people could only be overcome by evil people. However, Ling Han would definitely feel incredibly aggrieved if he knew of their thoughts. After all, how could he be considered an evil person? Alchemy apprentice Mo led the way, and Ling Han lazily trailed behind him. He had already placed the Empress and the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden in the Black Tower. It was always good to remain cautious. After all, what if his expectations were different from Alchemist Ziqing's actual thoughts? If Alchemist Ziqing targeted him, he could indeed enter the Black Tower right away. However, what about his two beautiful wives? As Ling Han and Alchemy apprentice Mo disappeared into the distance, the others in the Alchemist Pavilion immediately launched into spirited discussions. Once Ling Han visited Alchemist Ziqing, would the Alchemy City lose a young rising star? Many people shook their heads in pity. They were convinced that Ling Han's future was fraught with grim possibilities. Although Ling Han had gained the upper hand in his tussle with Alchemy apprentice Mo, the most critical factor wasn't between the two of them. Instead, the final decision lay with Alchemist Ziqing. If Alchemist Ziqing was dissatisfied with Ling Han, this young rising star wouldn't live to see tomorrow. With Ling Han's crappy attitude, it was hard to say what would happen. Under Alchemy apprentice Mo's guidance, the two of them quickly arrived at the transfer formation outside the city. Alchemy apprentice Mo enjoyed a fairly high status, so he didn't need to use star stones to activate this transfer formation. The two of them were quickly teleported to the 5th level. In reality, the 5th level was even smaller than the previous 4 levels. Of course, this was only relatively speaking. In terms of absolute area, it was still astonishingly large. There were only 17 mountains here, and each of them housed a mighty figure. Even if they had descendants, they generally wouldn't live together. Usually, they would only live with 1 or 2 alchemy apprentices or cultivation apprentices. Thus, there were few people at this level. Gazing into the distance, one could only see blue mountains and green trees. This was a place that was brimming with vitality. Alchemy apprentice Mo led Ling Han to the 7th mountain peak. In terms of how these mountains were numbered, Ling Han wasn't sure if it represented anything. There were no paths on the mountain, so Ling Han and Alchemy apprentice Mo directly flew to the peak of the mountain. There were no wild winds here, so even severing mundane tier cultivators could easily reach the peak of the mountains. A small mansion appeared before them. This was truly a small mansion. Compared to the mountain peak that it rested on, it looked like a tiny speck of sand in a vast ocean. "You can enter now. Grandmaster Ziqing has already been waiting for a very long time," Alchemy apprentice Mo said with a cold sneer. In his eyes, Ling Han was seeking death by making Grandmaster Ziqing wait for so long. Ling Han smiled calmly as he strode into the mansion. There was speculation in his mind, but this speculation had yet to be verified. Alchemy apprentice Mo didn't follow him inside. Instead, he closed the gates and stood guard outside. Inside the mansion, the most eye-catching area was an alchemy room. This was a room that could greatly speed up the flow of time. However, it could only do so by 100 times. This was already the absolute limit of 4-star forces. Ling Han glanced at it for a brief moment, and only then did he cast his gaze toward the elder who was calmly sipping tea in the center of the garden. His hair and beard were white, yet he was filled with vigor and vitality. This was especially the case for his eyes, which were filled with life and energy. He gave off a dignified and imposing aura. "Brat, you're fairly courageous, aren't you?" Chapter 1886 Huge Gamble. Chapter 1886 Huge Gamble. This elder was naturally Alchemist Ziqing. There was an imposing expression in his eyes as he gazed at Ling Han, and it was as if just his gaze alone would be able to suppress all matter. He was indescribably mighty. He was an ascending origin tier elite, after all, so he was naturally as powerful as could be. Ling Han's mind whirred, yet his expression remained unchanging. Instead, he smiled calmly and said, "Senior, I don't quite understand. I invited you time and time again, yet you declined my invitations with all kinds of excuses. You seem to view yourself in even higher regard than me?" Alchemist Ziqing said. His expression was solemn, and a projection of the great Tao started to materialize behind him, transforming into all kinds of different shapes and forms. This was a projection that was filled with imposing might. This old man was even stronger than old Demon Blood Shadow. Even though Ling Han was too weak to compare their auras, he had a nagging feeling that Alchemist Ziqing was more powerful. He smiled and said, "I've been treated unfairly." "Oh? You beat up my alchemy apprentice, yet you're claiming that you've been treated unfairly?" Alchemist Ziqing couldn't help but chuckle in extreme anger. However, Ling Han remained extremely calm and composed. If Alchemist Ziqing genuinely wanted to punish him, would he speak so much nonsense with him? To a 4-star alchemist, Ling Han was nothing more than a severing mundane tier cultivator and a 1-star alchemist, regardless of how freakish he was. He was nothing in their eyes. They could kill him with a single thought. Now, however, Alchemist Ziqing was actually speaking so much nonsense with him. Combined with his previous speculation, Ling Han was even more certain of himself now. "I've indeed been treated unfairly," he said. "Moreover, I feel extremely aggrieved and furious." "Hey, you're becoming more and more wanton," Alchemist Ziqing said with a cold smile. Ling Han remained composed as he said, "A measly alchemy apprentice actually dared to shout commands at me, a 1-star alchemist. What happened to the rules and regulations? To say nothing of other 1-star alchemists, even 2-star alchemists and 3-star alchemists remained silent. It was as if they were already accustomed to this. I find this to be unacceptable." "Oh? So that's your reason for beating up my alchemy apprentice?" Alchemist Ziqing asked in a calm voice. There was a profound expression on his face. Ling Han smiled and replied, "Indeed. How audacious of you. Have you heard of this phrase before? Before beating a dog, one also needs to consider their master," Alchemist Ziqing said in a menacing voice. A terrifying killing intent radiated from his body, and he immediately transformed into a petrifying demon king. He lightly slammed the table, and Ling Han shuddered even though there was no noise. It was as if heaven and earth were about to collapse. This was the might of an ascending origin tier elite. Each of their actions could affect one's mind. "Seeing that you're a prodigy, I'll make an exception and give you a chance," Alchemist Ziqing said. He paused for a moment before continuing. "I can spare you if you immediately kowtow and apologize to my alchemy apprentice." Ling Han didn't hesitate before replying. "I can be killed, but I can't be humiliated. Moreover, I did nothing wrong, so why do I need to apologize? Haha, I've lived for trillions of years, yet this is the first time I've come across such an audacious brat. Since you insist, you can die with your measly dignity intact." Alchemist Ziqing immediately lashed out with his palm. Boom! His palm transformed into a colossal flaming hand that was shrouded in symbols of the great Tao. To severing mundane tier cultivators, this was nothing short of a palm of death. To say nothing of facing it head-on, just glancing at it could instill them with boundless terror. Those who were more cowardly might directly collapse upon seeing it. Moreover, this palm strike was extremely slow, and it was as if it wanted to drown Ling Han in terror before taking his life. Ling Han clasped his hands behind his back and stood as straight as a sword. If this palm struck him, he would definitely have no time to enter the Black Tower. Right now, he was taking a huge gamble. He was gambling on his understanding of alchemist Zi Ching. If he lost this gamble, he would have to pay with his life. In reality, Ling Han didn't need to take this gamble. Since he had the Black Tower, he would naturally be safe if he entered it. Of course, this was unless he came across a celestial king. However, the more powerful he became, the less he wanted to rely on the Black Tower. At the very least, he didn't want to rely on it when he didn't need to. If you kneel and beg for forgiveness, you still have a chance to survive, Alchemist Zi Ching said. His voice boomed like thunder, almost rupturing Ling Han's eardrums. His words more so pierced into his Tao heart, carrying with it a profound and unstoppable might. Ling Han didn't reply, and he simply remained standing straight and proud. Boom! The palm landed, and the entire seventh peak shuddered. A devastating shock wave swept past, and Ling Han's figure gradually reappeared. He was completely unscathed. This wasn't because Ling Han was heaven-defyingly powerful. He naturally couldn't block the attack of an ascending origin tier elite. Instead, it was because the palm strike had avoided him at the last possible moment. Otherwise, he would have already been dead. Moreover, not a single shred of his corpse would have remained. Ha! Alchemist Zi Ching chortled with laughter. His killing intent instantly vanished, and his laughter was as joyous as could be. It was as if his mood had suddenly improved to the extreme. Although Ling Han's back was drenched in cold sweat, his expression still remained calm and unchanging. He knew that he had gambled right. Anyhow, even if he had gambled wrong, it wasn't as if he would truly die. After all, he could channel the indestructible Heaven's Scroll and rise from the ashes, giving him another chance. Moreover, doing so would even dispel the black murderous curse. However, it was best not to use this kind of resurrection technique. After all, such techniques couldn't be used many times. Following his advance in cultivation, he would only obtain an extra 1 or 2 opportunities to channel rising from the ashes. Moreover, he viewed the black murderous curse as a kind of grindstone to temper himself with, so he didn't want to dispel it any time soon. Brat, you're truly audacious, Alchemist Zi Ching said. Contrary to before, Ling Han became much more respectful. He clasped his hands in respect and said, "Thank you for sparing me, senior." A look of appreciation spread across Alchemist Zi Ching's face. Those who only knew how to be rude and unreasonable had no future. However, Ling Han knew when to be tough, and he also knew when to be respectful. Where he needed to be tough, he would be extremely tough. Where he needed to be respectful, he would ensure that he followed all of the proper etiquette. Alchemist Zi Ching was extremely satisfied with his performance. After so many years, he had finally found a prodigy who suited his tastes. "You already guessed that I wouldn't kill you?" Alchemist Zi Ching asked. Ling Han smiled and replied, "I was 70 to 80% sure. But you weren't 100% sure. Moreover, what if you guessed wrong?" Alchemist Zi Ching asked. Ling Han's smile remained, and he answered, "A probability of 70 to 80% was already worth a gamble." He naturally wouldn't say that he could still rise from the ashes, giving him a sliver of a chance even if he guessed wrong. "Bravo! Bravo!" Alchemist Zi Ching exclaimed. His eyebrows and beard quivered, and it was clear that he was beside himself with excitement. He gestured with his hand, and his expression became as kindly as could be. "Lad, come here, take a seat." Ling Han walked over, and sat opposite Alchemist Zi Ching. He rested his hands on his knees, and his expression was filled with respect. Alchemist Zi Ching became even more satisfied. His eyes were filled with approval, and he smilingly asked, "Do you consider me as someone who will allow those beside me to act in a domineering and wanton manner?" Ling Han spoke his mind, saying, "I didn't understand senior before, So upon seeing Alchemy Apprentice Mo's arrogance and haughtiness, I indeed considered Senior as such a person. However, after teaching Alchemy Apprentice Mo a lesson, the law enforcement officers that I expected didn't arrive. Instead, I was visited by Alchemy Apprentice Mo again. At that time, I knew that Senior definitely wasn't such a person. Ha! Alchemist Ziqing laughed heartily upon hearing this. Then tell me, why do I allow little Mo to act so wantonly, so much so that many others also consider me as an unreasonable person? Chapter 1887 Sudden Turn. Chapter 1887 Sudden Turn. Ling Han pondered for a moment before replying. Perhaps Senior wanted to find someone who isn't afraid of power and might? Young man, you're worth teaching, Alchemist Ziqing said with a hearty laugh. He stroked his beard, and continued. I purposefully allowed little Mo to act so haughtily because I wanted to see if anyone dared to speak out. However, it's a shame that no one ever dared to step forward to oppose him. Disappointment spread across his face, and he said, in fact, this was a test for those holy sons and holy daughters. However, who would have thought that they would all try to please little Mo instead? They lack even the most basic confidence and toughness, so how can they lead a powerful sect? If Lu Xianming and the others heard this, they would definitely feel extremely vexed and stifled. Were they not pleasing Alchemy Apprentice Mo out of respect and reverence for Alchemist Ziqing? Now, however, they were being belittled as nothing but trash. However, this made a lot of sense. As holy sons and holy daughters, they should have indeed possessed the toughness and domineering might of leaders. Regardless of how arrogant and wanton Alchemy Apprentice Mo was, he shouldn't have been able to ride on top of the holy sons and holy daughters' heads. Otherwise, what ethics and rules would there still be? Ling Han didn't comment on this. After all, these were the considerations of a high and mighty ruler. He didn't have the right to comment on these matters. Let's not talk about this. At the very least, you've arrived here, Alchemist Ziqing said, suddenly changing the topic. A look of appreciation spread across his face, and he asked, Brat, are you interested in joining Alchemy City? Ling Han smiled, and replied, Since Senior has asked, I naturally have no reason to refuse. Brat, you were already planning on joining, weren't you? Yet you've come here to flatter me now. Alchemist Ziqing chuckled, and continued, However, I'm relatively pleased to hear your flattering words. As long as you're happy, Ling Han said. At this moment, he was no longer haughty and arrogant. He indeed wanted to learn some things from Alchemy City. In fact, he wanted to learn many things. This was a force that had existed for heaven knew how many billions of years. Perhaps it had already existed for several epochs. Thus, it was in possession of countless pill recipes. To Ling Han, these were extremely valuable resources that were no less than celestial King-tier cultivation techniques. One had to realize that Alchemy City had once produced a 5-star alchemist. You can become the 10th holy son of the Alchemy City, Alchemist Ziqing said with a solemn expression. He paused for a moment before continuing. However, the position of holy son is incredibly important, so I can't decide this all by myself. I need you to convince everyone with your abilities. Ling Han smiled and said, Through fighting? This is up my alley, and I can guarantee that I'll beat all of the other holy sons into submission. Alchemist Ziqing faltered upon hearing this. He was rendered slightly speechless. Was his potential successor a born fighter? Upon encountering any disagreement, his first thought was to fight? How barbaric! Alchemists enjoyed an extremely lofty status, so how could they fight and tussle all day long? Doing so would be far too lowly. Through alchemy, of course. Alchemist Ziqing hurriedly corrected. Oh. Ling Han appeared slightly disappointed upon hearing this. This was something that could be resolved with fists, so why couldn't they be more direct and forthright? Alchemist Ziqing felt slightly regretful now. How was this holy son so violent? In the future, would he pummel anyone he didn't like? Wouldn't that be losing face for Alchemy City? His expression was solemn, and he said, If you want to become the 10th holy son of the Alchemy City, you have to prove yourself through your strength in alchemy. Ling Han pondered for a moment before saying, I know how to refine pills. Alchemist Ziqing roared with laughter, and he said, That can't be considered as refining pills. At most, you're only just barely refining pills. Ling Han wasn't willing to accept this. The first time he had refined a celestial pill, it had already been at the medium level. Thus, was his talent not freakish? Don't be dissatisfied, Alchemist Ziqing said with a chuckle. Your alchemy talent is indeed outstanding. Otherwise, I wouldn't have picked you to transform the decaying ways of Alchemy City. In terms of alchemy, however, you're genuinely a novice. Any random person is 100 times more skilled than you. Ling Han was even more unwilling to accept this, and he was just about to open his mouth to speak. However, Alchemist Ziqing waved his hand, signifying for him to remain silent. Refining alchemical pills is similar to tempering weapons. This isn't a process that's completed in a single step. Instead, it requires many steps and refinements, and a great amount of work, Alchemist Ziqing said in a leisurely voice. Ling Han was astonished upon hearing this. Refining pills required many steps and refinements? Was this a joke? When refining pills, one would either succeed or fail. Failure was just that, failure. How could there be any concept of refinement? Alchemist Ziqing noticed his confusion, and he said, Take out a celestial pill that you've refined. Ling Han did as he was told, handing a celestial pill to Alchemist Ziqing. Follow me, Alchemist Ziqing said. He led Ling Han into the alchemy room. He then lit up a cauldron, and it was as if he were about to refine a pill. Ling Han gasped upon seeing this. You're truly going to refine my pill again? Alchemist Ziqing didn't explain anything. Instead, he directly tossed the celestial pill into the cauldron before him. He then immediately started to strike the cauldron with his palms. This was no joke, and the force of his strikes roused the great Tao of fire, triggering brilliant rays of regulation light. Under the heat of these profound flames, the celestial pill quickly showed signs of melting. It was also at this moment that Alchemist Ziqing suddenly gave a soft shout, and unleashed bursts of light from his palms, sending them into the celestial pill. The celestial pill instantly lit up with a brilliant glow, causing the surroundings to become as dazzling as could be. A look of astonishment spread across Ling Han's face. This was because the celestial pill actually stopped melting. Instead, it started to undergo some other change. He was unable to describe this change, and he could only ascertain that the celestial pill was undergoing some kind of fundamental transformation. In terms of whether this transformation was positive or negative, he also had no idea. Anyhow, this alchemy room possessed the ability to speed up time. 1 day outside would be equivalent to 100 days inside. Thus, after almost 1 day in the outside world, 90 or so days had already passed inside the alchemy room. Ling Han had observed Alchemist Ziqing's techniques this entire time. Although he didn't fully understand them, he was certain that a 4-star alchemist wouldn't show him these techniques for no reason. They wouldn't toy with him in such a way. On the 93rd day, Alchemist Ziqing suddenly gave a soft shout before opening his mouth, and breathing out a column of purple light. Looking closely, this was an orb of purple flame that was pulsating with a terrifying radiance. This was Grandmaster Ziqing's source power. Each cultivator possessed their own source power, and these were generally very lackluster. Ling Han was an exception, however, and he had obtained 2 source powers of heaven and earth. Otherwise, his source powers wouldn't have been so extravagant. Alchemist Ziqing's source power flames enveloped the celestial pill. Theoretically speaking, these flames should have instantly incinerated the celestial pill. However, Alchemist Ziqing had clearly controlled his power extremely well. The celestial pill spun around inside the purple flames, and it started to become increasingly transparent, like a crystal. Exit! Alchemist Ziqing exclaimed as he extended his hand and made a grabbing motion. The celestial pill flew into his palm. Compare it to before, he said as he casually tossed the celestial pill to Ling Han. Ling Han caught the pill and started to carefully examine it. He immediately exclaimed in surprise. A new golden vein pattern had appeared on the celestial pill. He observed it again, and he then raised it up to take a sniff. His expression immediately changed, and he exclaimed, "It's reached the high level!" This was unfathomable. An alchemical pill should have remained at whatever level it was at upon the completion of its refinement. How could it be refined a second time, and even rise in level? Just what kind of celestial technique was this? Ling Han looked up at alchemist Ziqing, and his eyes were filled with puzzlement and keen interest. Chapter 1888 Becoming a Disciple. Chapter 1888 Becoming a Disciple. Alchemist Ziqing was extremely satisfied with Ling Han's current expression. This was exactly what he wanted to see. Only if Ling Han was interested could he impart his skills. Otherwise, it would be a case of forcing a stubborn bull to drink. "Do you want to know why?" Alchemist Ziqing asked with a smile. "Yes," Ling Han replied with a nod. Alchemist Ziqing nodded and said, "This is called spirit refinement, and it's a process of intertwining the source power of heaven and earth of the celestial pill with the great Tao. Doing so will elevate the quality of the alchemical pill. Moreover, spirit refinement can be carried out more than once. With each successful spirit refinement, one can elevate the quality of a celestial pill to a new level. Successfully completing one spirit refinement is termed as first refinement. There also exists second refinement, third refinement, fourth refinement, and so on." He paused for a moment before saying, "According to my knowledge, one can complete spirit refinement a total of 9 times. However, each subsequent spirit refinement will increase in difficulty. Moreover, if one fails, the alchemical pill will also be destroyed. The ability of an alchemist isn't merely decided by their star rank. It also depends on how many spirit refinements they can perform. Only those who can complete 5 or more spirit refinements have the right to be called a Grand Master." Ling Han was extremely curious, and he asked, "Senior, how many spirit refinements can you perform?" Alchemist Ziqing paused for a moment before answering. "The difficulty of spirit refinement varies according to the level of different alchemical pills. Moreover, it's not the case that spirit refinement will be easier on a 1-star alchemical pill than a 4-star alchemical pill. For example, I refined your Tao regulating pill a total of 7 times. If it were a 3-star alchemist, reaching the 3rd refinement or 4th refinement would already be their extreme. My extreme is the 7th refinement. 7th refinement. In other words, he could elevate the quality of an alchemical pill 7 times. After 7 refinements, even an initially low-level alchemical pill would end up being far superior to a pinnacle-level alchemical pill. At that time, how would these pills be ranked? Do you want to learn this?" Alchemist Ziqing asked with a smile. He wore an expression of eager anticipation as he looked at Ling Han. Producing an outstanding disciple, or perhaps even a disciple who surpassed him, would fill him with a sense of grand achievement. "I do," Ling Han immediately answered with a nod. A haughty expression appeared on Alchemist Ziqing's face, and he asked, "But what right do you have to become my disciple? Why are you worthy of my guidance?" This? Ling Han racked his brain for a good reason. There was definitely no need to mention his cultivation talent. After all, this was an alchemist he was talking to, so he definitely wouldn't give a toss about his cultivation talent. In terms of alchemy ability, however, Alchemist Ziqing was already near the peak stage. That being the case, would he need to care about Ling Han's alchemy talent? Ling Han scratched his head. Perhaps he should say that he was confident in becoming a 5-star alchemist, at which time he would bring great reputation to Alchemist Ziqing. To produce a 5-star alchemist would naturally bring great honor and glory to the master as well. However, just like no one could guarantee that they would become a celestial king, no one could guarantee that they would become a 5-star alchemist either. Let me rephrase my question. Alchemist Ziqing said. He naturally wouldn't reject Ling Han as a disciple. Otherwise, he wouldn't have spoken so much nonsense with him. In fact, he was simply asking these questions to challenge Ling Han a little. Ling Han was young, after all, so he naturally shouldn't become too arrogant and conceited. Why do you want to learn alchemy? Why do I want to learn alchemy? Ling Han pondered over this question, and he realized that he had quite a lot of aspirations. After refining an alchemical pill, he could use it himself, he could give it to those close to him, he could use it to make friends, he could sell it, or he could exchange it for some peculiar item. After all, some items weren't for sale, and they could only be obtained through a fair exchange of items. Ling Han mulled over this question for a long time, and his mind also wandered to alchemist Zi Cheng's past history. In the end, he replied, "To earn money." He hadn't said this just to please alchemist Zi Cheng. He indeed needed a great number of starstones so that he could obtain more godly metal to raise his divine demon sword to the celestial level. This was a huge burden on him, and it was also his biggest motivation to earn more money. Alchemist Zi Cheng was ecstatic upon hearing this. He clapped his hands and laughed heartily as he said, "Very well! Very well! Pay! To hell with those lofty aspirations, and to hell with rejuvenating alchemy. Pay!" Back then, I had only picked up alchemy because I was suffering from poverty. I had no option but to find a way to feed myself. Who would have thought that I was actually so suited for alchemy? "I'm willing to take you as my disciple." Ling Han couldn't help but grimace. This Grandmaster was truly a little, what should he say? Crude? However, his crudeness was down to earth, and it resonated with Ling Han. Alchemist Zi Cheng waved his hand, and said, "Brat, aren't you going to hurry up and acknowledge me as your master?" Even though Ling Han was confident that he could become a 5-star alchemist in the future, this would definitely be an extremely difficult path that was filled with obstacles. Alchemy was similar to cultivation in that both became increasingly difficult as one progressed in level. No, it was even more difficult than cultivation. After all, how many cultivators existed in the celestial realm? However, how many alchemists were there? At the very least, there were celestial kings in the eastern celestial realm. Moreover, there were even 8th heaven celestial kings. However, were there any 5-star alchemists? There had already been tens of billions of years without a 5-star alchemist. As such, a 4-star alchemist was more than skilled enough to become his master. Most importantly, alchemist Zi Cheng suited Ling Han's tastes. Indeed, they both appreciated each other's personalities. Ling Han kneeled down and said, "Disciple Ling Han pays respects to his master." He performed a deep bow toward his new master. Alchemist Zi Cheng dragged a chair over and accepted Ling Han's 3 kneels and 9 kowtows. With this small ceremony finished, he happily helped Ling Han up, saying, "My good disciple, you're my 4th disciple, but also my only current disciple." A look of reminiscence appeared on his face, and he said, "Your 3 senior brothers are already 4-star alchemists now. Although they're still not as skilled as your master, their level already isn't far off. However, all of them have already left." Ling Han was slightly surprised, and he asked, "Why? Perhaps they were ungrateful wretches?" He felt slightly angry upon thinking of this. This was one of the things that he detested the most. Alchemist Zi Cheng shook his head, and said, "If they continued to follow me, they would only be able to reach the same height as me. Their limit would be 4 stars. If they want to become 5-star alchemists, however, they must leave my shadow and discover their own paths." By the looks of it, this was something that both master and disciples had silently agreed on. His 3 previous disciples had all set up their own forces, and they were all attempting to create their own system of alchemy so that they could become a 5-star alchemist. If you can't overcome the ordinary process, you'll also be kicked out in the future, Alchemist Zi Cheng said in a solemn voice. Ling Han pondered for a moment before saying, "This disciple will definitely try his best so that master doesn't need to kick me out." Alchemist Zi Cheng laughed heartily upon hearing this. He held high hopes for Ling Han, and it was because of this that he had specially taken Ling Han as his disciple. Otherwise, it had already been tens of billions of years since he had taken his last disciple. However, could Ling Han overcome the barrier of 4 stars and become a 5-star alchemist? Alchemist Zi Cheng didn't dare to make any categorical claims. He could only say that Ling Han had a sliver of a chance. "I'll now hand you your first mission. That is, I want you to become a holy son," he said with a serious expression. I can only propose this, but whether or not the two other 4-star alchemists agree is completely up to your performance. I also require you to master the first refinement within a year. 1 year. This was an extremely strict demand. Even with a time cultivation chamber that could accelerate time by 100-fold, this was still only 100 years. It was almost impossible to master the first refinement within this time frame. However, if Ling Han wanted to become a 5-star alchemist, he had to overcome all forms of difficulties and impossibilities. Chapter 1889 Promise. Chapter 1889 Promise. Afterward, Alchemist Ziqing taught Ling Han many things regarding spirit refinement. Of course, he also told Ling Han about the two other 4-star alchemists who resided in Alchemy City. One of them was called Heavenly Heart, and he was an extremely peculiar being. This was because he had no parents. She hadn't been produced by a mother and a father. Instead, he had been nurtured by heaven and earth. His true body was actually a celestial pill. In terms of the exact time that he had been created, it was already too long ago to say with certainty. However, it was extremely likely that he had been created 1 epoch ago. At that time, there had still been a 5-star alchemist in Alchemy City, and he had refined a total of 11 celestial pills during his lifetime. One of them was the Heavenly Heart Tao-seeking pill. In fact, this was the last celestial pill that the 5-star alchemist had refined. At the same time, it was also a culmination of his pinnacle skill, and it was the alchemical pill that he was the proudest of. As such, he always kept it by his side. As time passed, this celestial pill gradually gained awareness and sentience. It developed intelligence, and it eventually became a genuine life form. And thereupon, there was now Alchemist Heavenly Heart. Because of his being a completely different life form, Alchemist Heavenly Heart's personality was also extremely different from everyone else. He was completely invested in alchemy, and his goal was to create more life forms like himself so that he wouldn't need to be lonely anymore. The other 4-star alchemist was called Chuyi, and he was an old geezer who had a strong addiction to wine. He also liked to travel around, and he was perhaps the only person in the world who had traveled throughout the entire Eastern Celestial Realm. According to rumors, this old geezer was even willing to casually exchange celestial pills for wine. However, because he liked to travel, Chuyi was almost never in Alchemy City. He would only return once every few thousand or tens of thousands of years. It was because of this that Alchemist Ziqing could wield so much power in the Alchemy City. At the same time, it was also because of this that Alchemy Apprentice Mo, a measly alchemy apprentice, could become so arrogant and haughty. In fact, he was almost riding on the heads of the holy sons and holy daughters. However, to appoint a new holy son was a matter of great significance. Thus, Alchemist Ziqing couldn't decide this all by himself. Instead, he needed to seek agreement from the two other 4-star alchemists. Seeking agreement from Alchemist Heavenly Heart would be relatively easy. After all, he also resided in Alchemy City. However, no one knew where Alchemist Chuyi had run off to. Even if they possessed message transmission talismans to directly communicate with each other, just how large was the celestial realm? Thus, how long would it take for Alchemist Chuyi to return? That being the case, Alchemist Ziqing had given Ling Han a deadline of 1 year. In reality, this was a relatively relaxed requirement. After all, Alchemist Chuyi definitely couldn't return within such a short time. Anyhow, Grandmaster Ziqing had set this requirement so that Ling Han would feel some pressure. Moreover, when Alchemy City appointed a new holy son, they would also need to invite the various forces in the surroundings to take part in the ceremony. Because of Grandmaster Ziqing's kindness, Ling Han naturally couldn't hide his dirty secrets any longer. He revealed that he had once killed the holy son and holy daughter of 2 separate celestial king-tier forces. Alchemist Ziqing's expression became extremely spectacular. Sure enough, this disciple was a huge troublemaker. To kill the holy sons, holy daughters, or successors of celestial king-tier forces on a whim. Not only was this audacious, but it also represented absolute strength. No wonder he had even defeated Zhao Qingfeng. "No worries," the elder said as he gritted his teeth. However, even though he said this, the bulging veins on his forehead were extremely clear. Alchemy City was a 4-star force, so its most powerful elite was only at the ascending origin tier. Even with the lofty status of alchemists, it was still a struggle for them to rival Celestial King tier forces. As such, they naturally couldn't compare to genuine 5-star forces. If Ling Han had only pummeled or severely wounded the successors of some Celestial King tier forces, Alchemy City could naturally resolve these situations by offering some compensation. With their lofty status as alchemists, the two Celestial King tier forces naturally wouldn't be too overbearing. Now, however, Ling Han had actually killed the most talented successors of these two Celestial King tier forces. That being the case, they had absolutely no reason to spare him. Fortunately, you have the support of the Rock Palace, Grandmaster Ziqing said with a sigh of relief. I've traveled to the Western Celestial Realm in the past, and I had wanted to find a skilled master there so that I could advance to become a 5-star alchemist. Thus, I have some slight understanding of this Rock Palace. This is a 9th Heaven Celestial King tier force, and such a powerful force is rare even in the Western Celestial Realm. It's a true ruler of the lands. With the Rock Palace's support, and with my help, we can perhaps resolve this troublesome situation. After all, the Zai clan and the Thundercloud Palace are only 1st Heaven Celestial King tier forces. An expression of pride and haughtiness spread across Alchemist Ziqing's face as he said this. Perhaps Grandmaster Ziqing was the only ascending origin tier elite who dared to say that these were only 1st Heaven Celestial King tier forces. This expression of confidence and haughtiness was not something that ordinary holy sons and holy daughters could possess. Ling Han nodded and said, I've caused trouble for Master. Alchemist Ziqing wore a strange expression, and he said, I have a nagging feeling that you'll only be causing more trouble in the future. Sigh. I truly wonder whether taking you as a disciple is a blessing or a disaster for Alchemy City. To say this before Ling Han, it was clear that Grandmaster Ziqing already treated him as a true member of Alchemy City. He didn't avoid saying this at all. Ling Han was rendered completely speechless. He was a magnet for trouble, and this had been proved time and time again. Not to mention more distant matters, he had only just defeated Zhao Qifeng. If this caught the attention of Yan Xianlu, what would he do if Yan Xianlu wanted to take him as a subordinate? He definitely wouldn't agree to this. At that time, would he have to fight with Yan Xianlu? However, he truly wanted to fight with Yan Xianlu. This was someone who had been born on the celestial path, and was renowned as an unparalleled monarch tier. Just how powerful was he? Of course, this fight definitely couldn't take place now. After all, Yan Xianlu had most likely reached the 5th severance already. If Ling Han battled with him now, he would definitely be pummeled if not killed. Under the corrosive refinement power of regulations, it would be useless regardless of how tough his godly bones were. So, my current aim is to reach the 1st refinement, and reach the peak stage of the 4th severance. Afterward, I need to open the door to the 5th severance, Ling Han said in his mind. Upon thinking of this, he mentioned the natural peach seal to Grandmaster Ziqing. You actually want to reach the 5th severance? Grandmaster Ziqing asked in shock. He was truly given a fright. Defeating Zhao Qifeng had indeed proved the strength and talent of Ling Han. However, the 5th severance. This was far too intangible and unreachable. In fact, many considered the 5th severance as nothing more than a legend. They viewed this as an unreachable level. However, his disciple actually wanted to reach the pinnacle of both cultivation and alchemy? The elder pondered for a moment before saying, Very well. As long as you become a holy son, your master will give you a natural peach seal. He could only agree to this request because he was the true ruler of Alchemy City right now. Otherwise, he wouldn't dare to pat his chest and make such a bold promise. A bashful smile appeared on Ling Han's face, and he asked, Master, can I have two? Grandmaster Ziqing widened his eyes in astonishment. Why do you want two? Perhaps you want to use one to eat the other? Ling Han rubbed his hands and said, Hee, that, my wife also needs one. Grandmaster Ziqing was astounded upon hearing this. Another person aiming to reach the 5th severance? Holy crap! This was a legendary level. What did legendary mean? Legendary meant that it only existed in legends, and was impossible to find in real life. Now, however, not only was Ling Han aiming to reach the 5th severance, but even his wife was aiming to reach the 5th severance. Perhaps he had refined alchemical pills for far too long, so much so that he had become senile and foolish. Perhaps he had been cooped up in his house for too long, so much so that his news had become outdated. No, he had to drink some wine 820 million years old to suppress his astonishment. We'll discuss this when you become a holy son. If you succeed, this will be your reward from Master. In the end, Grandmaster Ziqing gritted his teeth and agreed to Ling Han's request. Even though he was an alchemist, he truly wanted to witness the birth of a 5th severance monarch tier. 2, in fact. Moreover, they both had extremely strong ties and relationships with him. Chapter 1890 Alchemy Path. Chapter 1890 Alchemy Path. Ling Han instantly felt much more at ease after receiving alchemist Ziqing's promise. Otherwise, he and the Empress would have to suppress their cultivation after reaching the peak stage of the 4th severance. They wouldn't be able to advance an inch further. In just 1 year, he had to both master the 1st refinement and also reach the peak stage of the 4th severance. This was fairly difficult. However, this was a good and interesting challenge. Ling Han was filled with ambition, and he started to ask alchemist Ziqing all kinds of questions regarding spirit refinement. To celestials, resting was almost not needed. Thus, the master and disciple completely lost track of time. The master was fully focused on teaching, and the disciple was fully focused on learning. Fortunately, they were inside the alchemy room, which could speed up time by 100-fold. After half a year, Ling Han finally had some slight grasp of spirit refinement. Meanwhile, only a mere 2 days had passed in the outside world. I can lead through the door, but what you achieve is completely up to yourself, Grandmaster Ziqing said with a serious expression. If there's anything you're unsure about, come over to ask me. However, if you want to surpass me, it's best that you learn how to ponder questions by yourself. If you can resolve them yourself, then it's best that you resolve them yourself. Grandmaster Ziqing had learned this through experience. His first disciple had also been a prodigy in alchemy, and he had viewed him as a great treasure. If his disciple had any questions, he would immediately answer them. In the end, however, his first disciple turned out to be the least skilled among all of his disciples. When teaching his 2 later disciples, Grandmaster Ziqing changed his teaching method slightly. Instead of directly answering their questions, he would guide them to independently resolve their problems. However, he had still interfered too much. Even though the achievements of these 2 disciples surpassed those of his first disciple, he still hadn't unlocked their maximum potential. Thus, he was going to teach Ling Han differently. He was going to force him to think by himself, and resolve any problems by himself. He didn't want Ling Han to overly rely on him. After bidding farewell to alchemist Ziqing, Ling Han left the mansion and returned to the 4th level. Outsiders couldn't stay in the 5th level, and this was a strict rule. This was unless Ling Han gave up his status as disciple, and became an alchemy apprentice instead. If he did so, he could indeed stay in the 5th level. No one knew who had made this rule, but it had already existed for countless years. Even alchemist Ziqing abided by it. Ling Han didn't think too much about this. Anyhow, there were also alchemy rooms that could speed up time by 100-fold in the 4th level of the alchemist's pavilion. Thus, staying here wouldn't affect his pill refinement. Moreover, he spent a large majority of his time cultivating under the reincarnation tree anyway, so this didn't matter too much. Creak. He walked over and pushed the gates open. Ah! Alchemy apprentice Mo exclaimed upon seeing him. He was currently standing guard outside the gates, and he naturally didn't dare to enter the mansion without alchemist Ziqing's permission. Perhaps alchemy apprentice Mo appeared extremely high and mighty in the eyes of others. In reality, however, he was nothing more than a measly guard. However, there were no outsiders here, so no one could see Alchemy Apprentice Emo in such a state. Otherwise, they wouldn't have feared him so greatly. Alchemy Apprentice Emo stared at Ling Han, and it was as if he were looking at a ghost. His eyes were wide and bulging. What's going on? How is Ling Han walking out unscathed? Grandmaster Ziqing had summoned this brat twice, and Ling Han had directly flicked his sleeves and left the first time. Although he had accepted the invitation the second time, he had also forced Grandmaster Ziqing to wait for an extremely long time. Thus, Alchemy Apprentice Emo was certain that Ling Han would definitely be cut into 8 pieces and ground into fine powder. Was he hallucinating? He was definitely hallucinating. A wide smile stretched across Ling Han's face. With a wave, he said, "This isn't a hallucination. Impossible!" Alchemy Apprentice Emo exclaimed, jumping 9 meters into the air. It was as if someone had stepped onto his non-existent tail. His face was filled with shock and terror, and his voice was shaking as he pointed at Ling Han and said, "No, no, no, this is definitely my internal demon. There's no way that you're a living person." "Pa!" Ling Han slapped him across the face, saying in a calm voice, "Can an internal demon slap you?" "No, this must be a test from my internal demon," Alchemy Apprentice Emo exclaimed. His gaze was resolute, yet his expression was dazed. "Pa, pa, pa!" Ling Han slapped him several more times. However, Alchemy Apprentice Emo remained staunch in his belief that this was an internal demon. His resolution was truly admirable. Has he gone stupid? Ling Han stroked his chin in thought. So be it. Who cares about this kind of measly person? It's beneath me to worry about him. Ling Han flicked his sleeves and left. Meanwhile, Alchemy Apprentice Emo wore a dazed expression as he continued to stammer. "This is an internal demon. This is definitely my internal demon." After returning to the 4th level, Ling Han headed to the Alchemist's Pavilion once again. He remained calm, and he also kept a low profile. However, his reappearance sent giant waves through the Alchemist's Pavilion. Ling Han had beaten up Alchemist Ziqing, and he had then gone to visit Alchemist Ziqing. Yet, he had actually returned safe and sound. This was far too unfathomable. However, there were also many smart people, and they immediately came to a conclusion. Alchemist Ziqing greatly appreciated Ling Han, so he had forgiven him for his act of disrespect. Since this was the case, they definitely had to seize this opportunity. Numerous powerful clans dispatched their most skillful members to convince Ling Han to join them. He was a rising star, and his future was incredibly bright and limitless. If they could recruit him, their clan would definitely enjoy glory for countless generations to come. However, it was a shame that none of them could even see Ling Han. He had already started to cultivate in seclusion. Meanwhile, Lu Xianming, Qin Guyu, and the others all wore extremely dark expressions. Ling Han's performance was far too freakish. Not only was he a prodigy in both cultivation and alchemy, but he had even reached a pinnacle in both of these areas. This caused them to feel immense apprehension. Following Ling Han's rise in cultivation level, who could still defeat him and dispose of him in the future? Thus, they had to act as soon as possible. However, Ling Han was currently residing in the Alchemist's Pavilion, so how could they assassinate him? If they could, what would be the use of the Alchemist's Pavilion? That being the case, they could only silently bide their time. In fact, they were still unaware that Ling Han had already become Alchemist Ziqing's disciple. If they learned of this, they would either lose all fighting spirit, or they would take even greater risks, putting everything on the line. Under the reincarnation tree, Ling Han was currently digesting what Alchemist Ziqing had taught him about spirit refinement. Each branch of alchemists had its own unique spirit refinement technique. One couldn't help but admire the wisdom of the founders of these different branches. With their understanding of celestial medicines, and with their comprehension of the great Tao, they had managed to forcefully elevate the level of celestial pills. It was said that through enough spirit refinements, one could even transform a failed alchemical pill into a genuine alchemical pill. Right now, Ling Han didn't possess any foundation. Thus, his only option was to learn. However, Learning alone wouldn't allow him to surpass the peak of alchemist Zi Cheng's achievements. At most, he would only be able to reach the same height. Back then, alchemist Zi Cheng had surpassed the peak level of his own master. Even though he was still a 4-star alchemist, he could reach the 7th refinement instead of the 6th refinement. According to rumors, only by reaching the 9th refinement could one push open the doors to becoming a 5-star alchemist. In other words, spirit refinement was of utmost importance. Ling Han was in no hurry to start. Instead, he cultivated and pondered for a whopping 10,000 years. Only then did he conclude his cultivation. Spending 10,000 years under the reincarnation tree meant 100 days had also passed in the outside world. This was quite a long time. At this moment, the Empress was also cultivating. She was incredibly confident in Ling Han, and she was convinced that he could definitely obtain the natural peach seals. Thus, her current task was simply to advance to the peak stage of the 4th severance, as soon as possible. She would then refine the heavenly Tao Jade to enter the realm of Monarch tier. Meanwhile, the heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden could only wait for an opportunity to advance to the severing mundane tier. However, there were 2 infants in the Black Tower, and this brought her some comfort. At the very least, she wouldn't feel bored. These were spirit infants that had been born from the source power of heaven and earth. They were intrinsically close to Tao, and when they grew up, they would definitely become kings among kings. Thus, the heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden was filled with energy and vigor. She couldn't achieve great heights herself, so wouldn't it feel extremely satisfying and accomplishing to raise 2 outstanding prodigies? Ling Han was also happy to leave her to this. When these 2 infants grew up, he would take them as his disciples. Even though he would offload their education and guidance to others, taking disciples was still a fairly fun matter. The Empress continued to cultivate in seclusion, while the heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden took the 2 infants out for a breath of fresh air. Elsewhere, Ling Han entered an alchemy room, beginning his difficult path of mastering the 1st refinement. Chapter 1891 Creating an Independent Path. Chapter 1891 Creating an Independent Path. While practicing spirit refinement, Ling Han encountered countless problems and obstacles. Ling Han was a proud person, and he would only seek help from others if he truly couldn't resolve a problem by himself. Even without alchemist Zi Cheng's words, he would have still done his absolute best to resolve his own problems. 3 months passed in the outside world, and this corresponded to over 20 years inside the alchemy room. During this time, Ling Han also overcame several flare-ups from the black murderous curses. He had overcome them in an extremely calm and composed state. In fact, this allowed him to discover some slight secrets of the black murderous curse. Finally, Ling Han left for the first time, heading to the 5th level to seek help from Grandmaster Zi Cheng. Because Grandmaster Zi Cheng had already notified the others, Ling Han was able to reach the 5th level unobstructed. You've only come now? Grandmaster Zi Cheng asked in great astonishment. He had urged Ling Han to solve his problems by himself, but this was simply to prevent him from relying too much on others. In his imagination, Ling Han should have come over to seek help from him after a maximum of 10 days. Now, however, 3 months had already passed. Perhaps Ling Han hadn't been practicing alchemy in the cultivation chambers? However, upon hearing Ling Han's questions, alchemist Zi Cheng realized that he had been wrong. Ling Han definitely hadn't been slacking off. Instead, he had been working hard toward mastering the 1st refinement this entire time. Moreover, he had already made significant progress. Otherwise, he couldn't have asked these questions. Not only was alchemist Zi Cheng experienced, but he was more so a 4-star alchemist who had already mastered the 7th refinement. Thus, he was fully aware of what Ling Han's ability to ask these questions signified. He was a prodigy. He was a supreme prodigy. Of course, some of Ling Han's questions were a result of him driving himself into a dead end. However, most of his questions were extremely precise and to the point. Grandmaster Zi Cheng was naturally ecstatic upon hearing Ling Han's questions. He gave detailed explanations to each of them, causing Ling Han to continuously nod and exclaim in realization. As it turned out, some of his problems were actually extremely easy to resolve. By looking at them from a different perspective, an answer would immediately appear. It looked as if alchemist Ziqing could easily answer all of Ling Han's questions. However, this was built upon his wealth of experience, which had carried him to the position that he enjoyed today. If these questions had been posed to a two-star alchemist, they definitely couldn't have given such clear and thorough answers. This had to do with knowledge and experience. Alchemist Ziqing had nurtured all of his 3 previous disciples into 4-star alchemists. Not only did this prove his ability as an alchemist, but it also proved his ability to teach others. "Brat, you've done fairly well," Grandmaster Ziqing said with a satisfied nod. His eyes were filled with appreciation and adoration as he looked at Ling Han. Although this young disciple had only just pushed open the door to alchemy, the talent that he had displayed was truly something that even he had to marvel at. With a good master such as himself, combined with Ling Han's talent and hard work, it was truly possible for Ling Han to become a 5-star alchemist. 5-star alchemist. Grandmaster Ziqing felt slightly adrift as he daydreamed about this. He was so excited that even his head went numb. "There's hope that you can master the first refinement within a year," Alchemist Ziqing said in a solemn voice. In fact, he had set this time limit of 1 year to push Ling Han and give him some pressure. He hadn't held any expectations of Ling Han actually mastering the first refinement within a year. Even with the existence of the time cultivation chambers, mastering the first refinement within 100 years was still a great feat. However, he wasn't aware that Ling Han also possessed a reincarnation tree. This was a paramount treasure that even celestial kings couldn't possess. It was because of this that Ling Han could hope to master the first refinement within a year. The old man's hair and beard billowed in the breeze, and it was as if he were enjoying the euphoria of eating valuable ginseng. No. It was as if he had just earned a few 100 million starstones. This was an incredible feeling. His decision to take Ling Han as a disciple was definitely an extremely correct one. The more he looked at this disciple, the more he liked him. However, it was a shame that he didn't have any children. Otherwise, if he had a daughter, he would have wed her to Ling Han no matter what. Someone as talented as my disciple should have more children so that I have more disciples to teach, the old man thought to himself as he gazed at Ling Han. Such a talented bloodline definitely had to be passed down. Ling Han couldn't help but shudder upon seeing Alchemist Ziqing's expression. He had a nagging feeling that his master didn't have any good thoughts in mind. He hurriedly took his leave. The old man wasn't thinking of introducing him to a new wife, was he? However, his expression had already given him away. He looked just like a matchmaker. Ling Han returned to the 4th level, and continued to practice alchemy. If he failed in his pill refinement, he could still use spirit refinement to transform them into something useful. Of course, this was only a possibility and not a guarantee. If his spirit refinement also failed, the celestial pill would certainly become a trash pill. It would be impossible to transform it into something useful. Thus, Ling Han's wastage during these years was absolutely astonishing. He continued to successfully refine alchemical pills, yet he also continued to render celestial pills absolutely useless after failing to successfully complete spirit refinement. Each time he failed, he would enter the Black Tower and ponder the reasons for failure under the reincarnation tree. He definitely wouldn't repeat the same mistakes twice. However, there were far too many factors that could affect spirit refinement, and this forced him to endure failure after failure. Moreover, each failure represented a great number of star stones vanishing into thin air. This was a painful experience for Ling Han. His divine demon's sword. When in the world could it become a celestial tool? When could he not worry about star stones? If he became the leader of Alchemy City, he would most likely have enough wealth at his disposal. I'll continue to refine alchemical pills. For the sake of my divine demon's sword. 1 year had already passed in the outside world. However, Ling Han still had yet to succeed. This was the first time that he had failed to live up to someone's expectations. However, Ling Han had already forgotten about this. All of his attention and efforts were focused on spirit refinement. If Grandmaster Ziqing witnessed Ling Han's current situation and technique, he would definitely be given a huge shock. He would definitely shout, "Freak!" This was because Ling Han's technique already contained an element of uniqueness. It wasn't a direct copy of his master's techniques. Absorbing, digesting, and transforming it into something of his own. This was what Ling Han was currently doing. He wasn't simply emulating alchemist Ziqing. If Ling Han simply ventured down the same path as Grandmaster Ziqing, he could have already mastered the first refinement 3 months ago. However, he understood that developing a strong foundation was the most important thing. This would decide how high he could climb in the future. Thus, he would persist down this path even if it took him 10 years or 100 years. Because Ling Han hadn't visited the 5th level in so long, alchemist Ziqing especially came down to visit him. He had come in secret, and others naturally couldn't discover him if he didn't want them to. After all, he was an ascending origin tier elite. He stood outside the alchemy room for a long time, and his expression was one of deep astonishment, and also appreciation. In the end, he silently left without disturbing Ling Han. This disciple was truly incredible. He had to begin some preparations as Ling Han would definitely master the first refinement in the near future. At the same time, he had also received Alchemist Chu Ye's reply, saying that he would return to Alchemy City within half a year. When Alchemist Ziqing returned to the 5th level, he immediately issued an order. This was an order that brought great commotion to Alchemy City. Alchemist Ziqing had proposed to make Ling Han the 10th Holy Son of Alchemy City. Holy Son! Becoming a Holy Son of Alchemy City was a great deal. After all, this was a force that controlled almost the entire flow of alchemical pills into the Eastern Celestial Realm. It could be said that they possessed astonishing power. Moreover, Ling Han had already shot to fame before, and it was extremely likely that he was the youngest one-star alchemist in history. He was brimming with talent, so if he became a Holy Son, he would definitely become the most dazzling Holy Son. The others would become dull and insignificant. Upon hearing this news, the clans that were focused on cultivation were naturally filled with excitement as they tried to become acquainted with Ling Han. Meanwhile, Lu Xianming and the other Holy Sons and Holy Daughters started to hold secret discussions, brainstorming how to ruin Ling Han's chance of becoming a Holy Son. Assigning a new Holy Son wasn't up to Alchemist Ziqing alone. Instead, Ling Han's own talent and abilities were also of utmost importance. He was indeed a one-star alchemist. However, did he understand spirit refinement? Chapter 1892 Mastering Spirit Refinement. Chapter 1892 Mastering Spirit Refinement. As long as they humiliated Ling Han and gave him no chance of retreat, would Alchemist Ziqing still have the face to assign him the position of Holy Son? Would he not be afraid of the detrimental effects? Although this would also cause Alchemist Ziqing to view them in a negative light, this was still better than watching Ling Han becoming a Holy Son and eventually the leader of Alchemy City. Thus, they definitely had to take this gamble. Inside the alchemy room, Ling Han was completely undisturbed as he continued to practice alchemy. Time flew by, and it wasn't long before another 6 months passed. There was a tense expression on his face as he summoned an alchemical pill toward him, unleashing a column of 9 heavens flame as he did so. Boom! The flames enveloped the alchemical pill. He had failed to complete this step time and time again. His 9 heavens flame had always been too powerful, causing it to directly incinerate his alchemical pills. After several failures, and after countless reflections, Ling Han was confident that he would definitely succeed this time. Boom! The 9 heavens flame roared, and the celestial pill unleashed a brilliant glow. It was as if all of its essence had been roused, and it was as if this essence were intertwining with the Tao of heaven and earth to trigger some kind of indescribable transformation. Success! Ling Han roared with laughter. After so much difficulty, he had finally succeeded. Even if he cultivated for tens of thousands of years under the reincarnation tree, that was only cultivation in mind. His physical body would be subject to the real flow of time. In the time cultivation chamber, however, things were slightly different. both his divine sense and his physical body would be subject to the same flow of time. In terms of real time, he had spent 1.5 years to master the first refinement. In reality, however, his mind and body had already experienced a span of 150 years. This was a very, very long time. Fortunately, however, he had finally succeeded. Ling Han gazed at the celestial pill in his hand, on which there was a faint golden line. Even among first refinement celestial pills, there were still clear differences. For example, the golden line on Ling Han's celestial pill was relatively faint in color. It was far inferior to what Grandmaster Ziqing could produce. Ling Han couldn't help but sigh. He was still far too inexperienced. He truly couldn't compare himself to someone like Alchemist Ziqing. If Grandmaster Ziqing heard his laments, his beard would definitely quiver in anger. Just how many years had he spent on alchemy? If Ling Han caught up to him in such a short time, where the hell would that place him? Anyhow, the fact that Ling Han had already reached such a level upon his first successful spirit refinement was already extremely astonishing. Back then, even Grandmaster Ziqing hadn't performed so well. What else did Ling Han want? Ling Han exited the alchemy chamber, and returned to his own residence, only to see the heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden leading 2 children around the courtyard. This was a pair of troublemakers, one male and one female. They were both wearing red undergarments, and they were giggling as they ran around the heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden. Upon seeing Ling Han enter, both of them immediately shrunk behind her. They then stuck their heads out to stare at him. They were the last 2 members of the Garura tribe. Ling Han couldn't help but smile and say, "What, you don't recognize me anymore?" Although they had only been infants back then, their natural talent was far too extraordinary. Thus, they would definitely be able to remember Ling Han. Sure enough, the 2 children immediately charged over after observing him for a brief moment. They hugged his legs and shouted, "Stepfather! Fuck! When did I become your stepfather?" The heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden couldn't help but smile and say, "Layer and Ur have been thinking about you every day." The young boy was called Shirley, and the young girl was called Shiryu. This was because they had both leaped out from rocks. Ling Han shook his legs, yet the 2 children were stuck to him like bubblegum. He couldn't shake them off no matter what. In the end, he could only say, "Let go of me first." "No!" the 2 children shouted, continuing to tightly embrace his legs. In the end, they were only willing to let go after some persuasion from the heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden. She carried them in her arms. Ling Han chit-chatted with the heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden for a while, yet they couldn't act overly intimate, because of the presence of the 2 children. There was an aggrieved look in the heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden's eyes. Ling Han's heart wavered, and he leaned over and said, "I'll visit you at night." "Stepmom, why is stepdad visiting you at night?" Shirley asked. "How stupid are you? Stepdad is obviously going to play intimate games with stepmom," Shiryu said with a mature tone. "Oh," Shirley said with a nod. However, confusion spread across his face again, and he asked, "What do you mean by playing intimate games? You don't even know about intimate games? How stupid," Shiryu said with a disdainful look. "Children nowadays!" Ling Han sighed upon hearing this. He then pecked the heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden's red and supple lips before taking his leave. He arrived at the 5th level, where he reported his good news to Alchemist Ziqing. "You've succeeded?" Alchemist Ziqing asked with an excited expression. Even though Ling Han had taken 6 months longer than his requirement, this was still an incredible feat at the very least. It was better than what he had achieved in the past. Ling Han nodded, and he handed the alchemical pill to Alchemist Ziqing. "Please take a look, Master." Alchemist Ziqing accepted the celestial pill, and he instantly shuddered upon laying eyes on it. "This is the product of your first successful spirit refinement?" he asked. Ling Han nodded and replied, "It's far inferior to what Master can produce. I've let Master down." He was slightly embarrassed, and he was truly feeling guilty. Alchemist Ziqing wore a strange expression, and after a long time, he finally said, It's good that you know you're lacking. Although you're talented, you definitely can't become conceited or arrogant. Only by doing so will you have a chance to climb to the pinnacle of alchemy. Ling Han nodded in understanding, and he humbly accepted his master's teachings. Upon seeing Ling Han's slightly disappointed expression, Alchemist Xi Qing almost couldn't help but shout, "You're a motherfucking genius!" Although Ling Han's performance was indeed inferior to his, just who was he? He was a 4-star alchemist. Moreover, he had already mastered the 7th refinement. If Ling Han could rival him already, would there still be any reason left in this heaven and earth? Grandmaster Xi Qing was simply afraid that Ling Han would become too conceited if he spoke the truth. However, since Ling Han felt that he wasn't skilled enough, why not play along with him? However, upon seeing Ling Han's expression of disappointment, he couldn't help but feel extremely vexed. This was vexing, far too fucking vexing. As it turned out, taking such a supremely talented disciple also came with such kinds of headaches. Of course, in Alchemist Xi Cheng's eyes, these headaches were a joyful blessing. It would be great if Ling Han were even more talented, and if he gave him even more headaches. In 10 days, you'll be officially granted the title of Holy Son. However, this is also a test. At that time, anyone can step forward to challenge your understanding of alchemy. It's extremely likely that you'll also have to refine alchemical pills on the spot. Rest well these few days, and make sure you're fully prepared. Alchemist Xi Qing said. Ling Han nodded and replied, I understand. Anyhow, he had already been separated from his wife for so long, so now was a good time for some exercise. All right, you can go now. Alchemist Xi Qing said with a wave of his hand. Ling Han left the mansion, and a wide smile immediately spread across Alchemist Xi Qing's face. This smile grew larger, and he eventually couldn't help but roar with laughter. His boisterous laughter astonished countless surrounding birds. Incredible, far too incredible. This feels even more amazing than earning 1 trillion star stones. Alchemist Xi Qing was genuinely satisfied with this disciple. However, for the sake of Ling Han's future, it was a shame that he had to suppress his true emotions before him. He couldn't praise Ling Han too much. This left him feeling slightly regretful. However, once Ling Han became a holy son, his brilliance would be clear for all to see. He would become the most dazzling star in the alchemy city. With such a brilliant disciple, what else can I ask for? Alchemist Xi Qing said with a sigh of emotion. He felt as delighted as could be. Chapter 1893 Battle Again. Chapter 1893 Battle Again. A period of 10 days wasn't long, and it passed in the blink of an eye. Ling Han had kept a low profile these few days, and this was because he had been perfecting his spirit refinement technique. He had only succeeded in performing the first refinement, and he was still extremely far away from perfecting it. An alchemical pill could only be spirit refined a maximum of 9 times. Generally speaking, however, being able to spirit refine an alchemical pill 3 to 4 times was already extraordinary. Thus, the quality of each spirit refinement was incredibly important. If 2 alchemists of different skill levels both spirit refined an alchemical pill to the 3rd refinement, it was completely possible that the end result would be starkly different. Right now, Ling Han was working hard to reach the pinnacle of the 1st refinement. Even though Alchemist Xi Qing had said that an alchemist's level would also affect the level of their spirit refinement, Ling Han didn't mind spending more time on it, since he couldn't advance to become a 2-star alchemist anytime soon. From 1 star to 2 stars, the difficulty of refining alchemical pills would increase by at least 100-fold. After all, 1-star alchemical pills were for severing mundane tier cultivators, while 2-star alchemical pills were for dividing soul tier elites. That being the case, would they be on the same level? In Alchemist Xi Cheng's extremely optimistic predictions, it would take Ling Han at least 1 million years to become a 2-star alchemist. Moreover, this was taking into account the time cultivation chambers. However, Alchemist Xi Qing was unaware that Ling Han possessed a reincarnation tree. This was something that could greatly aid one's comprehension. Even so, it would still take Ling Han at least several thousand years to become a 2-star alchemist. In the past, Ling Han had once analyzed the process of refining pills as a 2-star alchemist. However, he had been forced to stop 1/10,000th of the way into his analysis. The regulations of heaven and earth that were involved in this process were far too complicated. Even though a severing mundane tier cultivator could refine 2-star alchemical pills, this would require a limitless amount of time. Moreover, after spending so much time, they could only refine a single type of 2-star alchemical pill. Fortunately, one would obtain a limitless lifespan after advancing to the severing mundane tier. Otherwise, it would be extremely likely that a 2-star alchemist could only refine a pitifully small number of alchemical pills before their death. Ling Han wasn't greedy, and he didn't try to learn how to cultivate more 1-star alchemical pills. Instead, he focused all of his effort on spirit refinement. Spirit refinement was a process of better understanding the fundamental constitution of celestial medicines and alchemical pills. It also pertained to the Tao of heaven and earth. In reality, one could attain Tao through any means. In the ancient realm, there were people who had achieved Tao through alchemy. This was naturally possible in the celestial realm as well. For example, alchemist Xi Qing had only been at the severing mundane tier when he had become a 1-star alchemist. After that, he hadn't placed any effort on cultivation. Instead, he had focused all of his effort on alchemy. However, as he continued to improve in alchemy, his cultivation naturally advanced as well, bringing him to the peak stage of the 4th severance, and then to the dividing soul tier. Afterward, he had then opened an immortal palace, and advanced to the immortal palace tier. There existed a myriad of Tao in heaven and earth, yet they all eventually led to the same destination. Thus, Ling Han was able to maintain his composure. Alchemy was also a part of cultivation. 10 days later, the Empress also came out of seclusion. It wasn't that she had reached the peak stage of the 4th severance. Rather, today was a significant day for Ling Han, her dear husband, so she naturally couldn't be absent. Morning came, and Ling Han headed off with his 2 wives. Meanwhile, bewitching Maiden Ro also tagged along without any invitation. She shamelessly pretended to be Ling Han's good friend. If Ling Han successfully became a holy son of Alchemy City, wouldn't he be able to casually gift others celestial pills in the future? As smart as this bewitching woman was, she naturally understood that she had to develop a good relationship with Ling Han. In fact, Ling Han was extremely unwilling to become too close to her. Firstly, this bewitching woman was far too charming and attractive. Secondly, the Empress always suggested that he should accept her 9 revolutions charm physique. This caused him to feel extremely opposed to the idea. However, the bewitching woman wore a dazzling smile, and it was hard for him to strike a smiling person. He couldn't shoo her away no matter what. Meanwhile, the heavenly phoenix divine maiden carried Shirley and Shiryu in her arms. They were both lively little devils, and they were extremely good at causing trouble. They looked bewitching Maiden Ro up and down, and they made all kinds of mature remarks and comments. This rendered Ling Han completely speechless. Where had these 2 brats learned these things from? The 2 brats were unafraid of heaven and earth, and they were only afraid of the Empress. It was as if the Empress' stunning beauty and dignity could affect even them. The ceremony was going to be hosted in the 4th level, so those who could attend were all powerful and influential people. At the very least, they had the background of a 3-star force. Ling Han looked around, and he immediately saw several familiar faces. For example, Fu Gaoyun, Fu Tonghai, Situ Tang, and Xiang Yan. One had to realize that the Fu clan was located extremely far away from here. Even with warships, it would still take them at least half a year to arrive here. Even so, they had still come to attend the ceremony. From this, it was evident just how powerful and influential the Alchemy City was. Attending this ceremony wouldn't necessarily put them in the good books of Alchemy City. However, if they didn't attend, what would they do if they entered the bad books of Alchemy City? In the Eastern Celestial Realm, almost all of the alchemists viewed Alchemy City as a holy land and totem for alchemy. With a single command, Alchemy City could easily gather and mobilize all of the alchemists. Thus, Alchemy City was a 4-star force that could somewhat rival 5-star forces. When Fu Gaoyun and the others saw Ling Han, their jaws all fell in shock. This was especially the case for Fu Xiaoyun, whose eyes also widened in deep astonishment. Among them, only Situ Xiaojun remained calm and composed. She simply muttered, "If his A*S wasn't penetrated, how could he have crawled to such a height?" Even though they had heard that the new holy sun was also called Linghan, they certainly hadn't linked the two Linghans together. Going from a hunted person to a holy son of Alchemy City? Who would believe this? Upon seeing Linghan's familiar face, they instantly felt as if they were in a dream. This felt far too unreal and extraordinary. Not only the members of the Fu clan, but the members of the Lunar sect, the Han clan, the Qianzhao clan, and the other clans were also stunned when they saw Linghan. However, a commander from the Rock Palace had already beaten them into submission back then. Now that Linghan was about to become a holy son of a 4-star force, they more so didn't dare to think about seeking revenge. Right now, a single thought was running through all of their minds: Linghan was far too good at bringing them surprises. In the beginning, he had caught everyone's attention with his freakish cultivation ability. At that time, he had actually killed the successors of 2 different Celestial King tier forces. Now, he had actually become a rising star of Alchemy City. How could there be such a freak in this world? Linghan simply flashed a smile at Fu Gaoyun. He then strode to the center of the plaza. The Empress and the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden followed closely behind him. Beside them, Bewitching Maiden Ro also shamelessly tagged along. Being able to gain renown in this kind of ceremony was extremely beneficial for her. In the future, those who wanted to target her or the Purity sect would have to consider the reaction of Alchemy City. They would have to weigh up whether they could offend this juggernaut. Anyhow, Alchemy City was already the most powerful force below Celestial King tier forces. Thus, as long as the Purity sect wasn't targeted by a Celestial King tier force, they would be as safe as could be. Bewitching Maiden Ro wasn't simply good at seducing others. Since she had become a holy daughter, she was naturally intelligent and able in more ways than one. The Empress noticed this, and a slight smile tugged at the corners of her lips. This seductive woman would eventually become her husband's. After all, she couldn't allow such a talented woman to be won over by someone else. She could act smug all she wanted now. In a rare sight, all 3 4-star alchemists of Alchemy City appeared at once. They were sitting on an elevated stage, and they were all at the ascending origin tier. Moreover, they were all radiating with an astonishing aura. One couldn't underestimate them simply because they were alchemists. Alchemist Ziqing stood up and said, "It's almost time. We can begin the ceremony now." He was going to host this ceremony. Firstly, he was the current chairperson of Alchemy City. Secondly, Linghan was his disciple. Thus, if he didn't support Linghan, who would? "Not so fast!" someone suddenly shouted. A young man flew over, and his face was filled with fighting spirit as he pointed at Linghan and shouted, "I want to battle against him again." This person was none other than Zhao Qifeng. Chapter 1894 Powerful Laxative. Chapter 1894 Powerful Laxative. This was such an important and dignified ceremony, yet someone had actually run over to cause trouble? Grandmaster Ziqing's expression instantly darkened. Zhao Qifeng jumping forward to ruin the atmosphere wasn't the most important aspect. Instead, it was what his actions signified. In order for today's ceremony to run smoothly, he had made many preparations. Among them, safety was naturally his top priority. It could be said that this shouldn't have happened. For example, Zhao Qifeng had already recuperated and rested for a long time. Even though he had already recovered several months ago, he hadn't gone wandering around. However, to prevent any mishaps, Alchemist Ziqing had still deployed an elite to keep an eye on him. Yet, Zhao Qifeng had still managed to arrive here. Who had let him out? One had to realize that Alchemist Ziqing was the current chairperson of Alchemy City. The 2 other 4-star alchemists didn't trouble themselves with the affairs of this city. In other words, no one could rival his power. Only when it came to a matter such as assigning a new holy son did he need to seek agreement from the 2 other 4-star alchemists. Humph! who dared to cause trouble. Impudence! A new holy sun is being crowned, and this is no place for you to act willfully. Scram! A dividing soul tier elite roared. Even though Zhao Qifeng possessed heaven-defying talent, he was only at the peak stage of the fourth severance. Thus, he was nothing in the eyes of this elite. However, Zhao Qifeng didn't so much as spare a glance at the elite. Instead, he continued to stare at Ling Han, with his fighting spirit culminating into something tangible. Ling Han, do you dare to battle against me? Judging from his fighting spirit, he had become significantly more powerful than before. As expected of a freakish prodigy. Not only did his previous loss not affect his Tao heart, but it even pushed him to improve and grow stronger. How unfathomable. He's clearly at the peak stage of the fourth severance already, yet his strength is still able to advance. As expected of a prodigy. Things are becoming interesting now. At that time, Ling Han only barely managed to defeat him. Now, however, Zhao Qingfeng's strength has grown by an explosive amount. It's hard to say who will win this battle. Although this is a martial arts competition and not an alchemy competition, it will still be a huge stain on the new Holy Sun's name if he suffers a huge loss on the day of his crowning. I'm curious about how Zhao Qifeng managed to come here. I refuse to believe that he could come here easily. Huh! You're saying that someone in the city is helping Zhao Qifeng? Everyone was engaged in spirited discussions. Meanwhile, those who had analyzed the situation more closely all wore solemn expressions. What did Zhao Qingfeng's appearance signify? Ling Han glanced at Zhao Qifeng, and he said in a calm voice, "You're nothing but a defeated opponent. Why would I not dare to battle against you? Last time was last time. This time is different," Zhao Qifeng said with a baleful expression. His killing intent was almost tangible, and it was clear that he had developed a stronger grasp on the regulation of slaughter. This wasn't strange. After their intense and inspiring battle, Ling Han had directly broken through to the fourth severance. Although Zhao Qifeng had lost, and although he hadn't gained any comprehension regarding the fifth severance, his killing intent had still pushed his regulation of slaughter to a higher level. He was brimming with confidence, and he was sure that his current power could allow him to easily shatter Ling Han's freakish physique with a single punch. The Empress stepped forward and coldly glared at Zhao Qifeng. Her dress billowed in the wind, hugging her body and revealing her flawless figure. She was as attractive as could be. Even as Ling Han's opponent, Zhao Qifeng couldn't help but be moved by the Empress. She was beautiful, far too beautiful. Even though he couldn't see her true appearance, just her figure and her indescribably noble aura alone was enough to make one want to kneel down to her and become her underling. Zhao Qifeng hurriedly suppressed his emotions and recollected his composure. An ice-cold killing intent radiated from his eyes. His life was dedicated to cultivation, and it was dedicated to becoming more powerful. He had to abandon everything that would detrimentally affect his goal of becoming stronger. "You're seeking death!" the Empress shouted with a cold humph. She resolutely launched an attack. The spectators all wore strange expressions upon seeing this. Ling Han had been incredibly audacious back then, and he had dared to fight with Zhao Qifeng and beat up Alchemy apprentice Mo. As it turned out, those beside him were also the same. What did it matter that this was Zhao Qifeng or Zhao Haifeng? They would directly do battle with him. However, the Empress was only at the fourth severance, so how would she battle against Zhao Qifeng? He was an Emperor tier, and he was already bordering on the level of Monarch tier. Apart from a select few people, who else in the same cultivation level could defeat him? Fuck! Before this thought could even flash past their minds, the Empress had already suppressed Zhao Qifeng in an extremely domineering manner. As her jade-like palm flashed through the air, Zhao Qifeng could do nothing but evade and block. She was far too powerful. How was she this powerful? Everyone was rendered speechless. This was a prodigy who could only appear once every epoch, yet they were popping up all over the place now. Was there still any reason in this heaven and earth? Fu Gaoyun and the others were even more stunned upon seeing this. They were aware that Ling Han was powerful, Yet they hadn't realized that the Empress was also this freakishly powerful. Now that they had witnessed the Empress' demeanor, they were all won over by her incredible beauty and power. Grandmaster Ziqing stroked his beard, and a slight smile spread across his face. No wonder his disciple had asked him for 2 natural peach seals. This young woman was indeed a freak, and she indeed possessed the potential to reach the 5th severance. She was a talent worth nurturing. During the first 200 exchanges, Zhao Qifeng could still manage to block and evade. Afterward, however, he slipped into an absolute disadvantage. After 400 exchanges, he could do nothing but suffer a beating. It was clear that he was no opponent for the Empress. His defeat was already a foregone conclusion. After 2,000 exchanges, he couldn't help but continue to vomit blood. He was barely hanging on to life. "Trash!" Lu Xianming said with a cold humph. He was standing with the other holy sons and holy daughters, and there was a look of intense disdain on his face as he glanced at Zhao Qifeng. He had initially hoped to see Zhao Qifeng causing Ling Han some trouble. Unexpectedly, however, he couldn't even defeat a woman beside Ling Han. He had instead become a stepladder, making Ling Han appear even more lofty and powerful. Just look! Even some woman beside Ling Han was a supreme prodigy. An immortal Palace Tier elite stepped forward and said, "Enough!" With a single motion, he separated the Empress and Zhao Qifeng. The Empress was extremely dissatisfied, and she shot a glare at the immortal Palace Tier elite. It was as if she wanted to beat him up. The immortal Palace Tier elite couldn't help but smile bitterly. Before the Empress' stunning beauty, he found that he couldn't become angry at all. Of course, her relationship with Ling Han was also a part of the reason. She was the woman of this new holy son, so he naturally had to give her some face. "Ling Han, can you only hide behind women?" Zhao Qifeng shouted, with fury and indignance on his face. After becoming more powerful, he had been filled with confidence, certain that he could defeat Ling Han with a single strike. To his disbelief, however, he had been defeated before he could even fight with Ling Han. He was truly about to explode with anger. The Empress was infuriated, and there was a menacing glint in her eyes as she looked at Zhao Qifeng. She radiated with an aura of paramount dignity. Ling Han stepped forward and placed a hand on her slender shoulder with a smile, saying, "Let me deal with him." The Empress nodded before stepping backward. Ling Han glanced at Zhao Qifeng before retrieving a pill vial and tossing it at him. "Here, don't say that I'm bullying you. This is an ice mist jade pill, and it can temporarily suppress your wounds and help you recover to your peak state. However, its effects will only last for an hour." This was an incredibly useful pill, and in some situations, it could even save one's life. Zhao Qifeng was astonished. He hadn't expected that Ling Han would still accept his challenge in such a situation. Moreover, he was even offering him such a valuable alchemical pill. He didn't hesitate as he accepted the pill vial and ingested the pill. He didn't take a second glance at it. If Ling Han dared to play any tricks in this kind of situation, would he still have any face in the future? "Aya!" Ling Han suddenly exclaimed. He patted his clothes and he said, "I'm so sorry. I retrieved the wrong alchemical pill. That's actually a powerful laxative." "Holy fuck!" Zhao Qifeng grimaced upon hearing this, and he almost vomited another mouthful of blood. Chapter 1895 One Finger. Chapter 1895 One Finger. "Aya, you truly don't have any sense of humor at all." "I'm just joking," Ling Han said with a shake of his head. "There are so many people here, so how could I poison you with my alchemical pills?" After hearing this, Zhao Qifeng still wanted to vomit blood. What kind of sense of humor should I have to appreciate your sick joke? Moreover, you're also aware that there are many people here, huh? Ling Han smiled and said, "How boring is a powerful laxative? I fed you a powerful aphrodisiac, and this will cause you to become extremely interested in furry things. Once you start, you won't be able to stop." "Why, you're lying!" Zhao Qifeng said with a shudder. However, what if this were true? He would definitely suffer a miserable fate. If he charged over to embrace and hump any furry thing that he saw, would he still have any face to show himself in the future? Although he was a cultivation prodigy, and although he was at the peak stage of the fourth severance, this was Alchemy City, which even had 4-star alchemists. Refining an alchemical pill that caused him to lose control of himself was definitely a simple task. Ling Han sighed before shaking his head and saying, "I already said that you have no sense of humor." "Sure enough, I was right." "Fuck. You're toying with me again?" Zhao Qifeng was wild with rage, and he clenched his hands into fists. He then unleashed a furious roar at the sky, and his thunderous roar surprisingly transformed into numerous sharp swords that were engraved with symbols of the Great Tao. They were extremely terrifying. This was a roar to vent his wild fury. However, this might also prove something else. He had indeed recovered his strength, and returned to his peak state. "Come battle!" he roared. The veins on his forehead were bulging. Shiryu clapped her chubby hands and exclaimed, "Stepdad is so talented at shooting his mouth off." "What does shooting his mouth off mean?" Shirley asked with a confused expression. "It means that he can enrage others to death with his mouth," Shiryu explained. "Oh, then Stepdad is truly very powerful," Shirley said, with his expression of confusion transforming into one of admiration. "I also want to learn how to shoot my mouth off." It was as if the two children were doing a comedy routine. However, as their childish voices traveled into Zhao Qingfeng's ears, his rage soared to a new height. Pa pa pa! His clothes suddenly started to rip and pop off. These were no ordinary clothes, and they were instead clothes that had been woven from strands of pseudo-divine metal and combined with the fur of immortal beasts. They were astonishingly tough, and they possessed extremely powerful defensive abilities. However, they had actually been ripped apart in Zhao Qingfeng's fit of rage. Just what kind of concept was this? His battle prowess has risen again! Heavens! He's already at the peak stage of the fourth severance, and he's already standing at the absolute pinnacle. How is his battle prowess rising again? If he battles against that woman again, it's hard to say who will come out on top. Ling Han is asking for trouble. TSK? Who told him to have such a toxic tongue? Who told him to provoke his opponent? That woman clearly defeated Zhao Qifeng already, and he was already enjoying an absolute advantage. Yet, he still insisted on joining the battle himself. Look where he's got himself now. He has no option but to eat his own bitter fruit. If Ling Han accepted Zhao Qingfeng's challenge now, there was a 99% chance that he would lose. If he refused the challenge, however, would he still have the face to show himself in the future? Ling Han was now caught between a rock and a hard place. However, he had pushed himself into this situation, so who could he blame? At this time, the members of Alchemy City couldn't help Ling Han, either. After all, Ling Han had caused this trouble himself. Ling Han wore a slight smile, and he said in a calm voice, "Sure, we can battle. But what in the world are you roaring for? Is it impressive that your voice is so loud?" In the past, he had still viewed Zhao Qifeng as an opponent. Following his advance to the fourth severance, however, Zhao Qifeng was no longer worthy of being his opponent. Battling against him wouldn't help him obtain any new improvements. Thus, Ling Han was naturally uncaring in his attitude. "Die!" Zhao Qifeng roared. He dashed forward, bringing with him the might of heaven and earth. Even though he had been enraged just then, he hadn't lost his composure. Instead, he had seized the opportunity to prepare a powerful attack. As he dashed forward now, he was like a furious dragon surging out from the sea. This was his most brilliant strike. Ling Han shook his head, and he casually raised his hand to block. Boom! There was a resounding boom as Zhao Qifeng exchanged a strike with Ling Han. Devastating rays of light shot into the surroundings, carrying with them the power of regulations. This wasn't a fighting arena, so how could there be any protective barrier? Several elites immediately dashed forward, with each of them responsible for stopping the shock waves in a certain direction. They couldn't allow anyone to get hurt. Meanwhile, Ling Han and Zhao Qifeng each retreated several steps. They were evenly matched in this exchange. However, everyone was astounded upon seeing this. In fact, their heads went numb with apprehension. They had clearly witnessed the might of Zhao Qingfeng's attack. That was definitely a vicious attack that had exceeded the level of severing mundane tier. Yet, Ling Han had easily blocked such a powerful attack with a casual wave of his hand. Just what kind of power was this? He was invincible. Everyone was transfixed with shock and disbelief. At this moment, none of them could find any words to describe Ling Han's freakish talent and power. Perhaps he was already a pinnacle monarch tier. In fact, he might even be able to rival Yan Xianlu? This thought flashed through everyone's minds. However, they quickly shook their heads, sure that they were overthinking things. Regardless of how powerful he was, Ling Han definitely couldn't rival Yan Xianlu. After all, this was a true and unparalleled monarch tier. Everyone in his generation and at the same cultivation level as him was destined to lose their luster. I refuse to believe this! Zhao Qifeng roared. His eyes were bloodshot, and as he slapped his chest, he immediately vomited another mouthful of blood. His aura rose to a new height. However, he wasn't satisfied with this, and he continued to slap his chest again and again. With each slap, his aura would become significantly more powerful. However, his eyes would also become increasingly bloodshot. It was as if he were about to transform into a burst of murderous aura. He was like a peerless divine sword that was radiating with heaven-splitting killing intent. He was going to muster the most powerful attack in his life. If he succeeded, both his divine sense and his body would undergo ascension. Perhaps he might even push open the door to the fifth severance. If he failed, however, he would consume an exorbitant amount of his essence, and he would have no hope of ever advancing to the fifth severance. At that time, he could only sever his own life. This was a huge gamble, one that would potentially cost him his life. He was nothing short of a madman. He was born for cultivation, and he was a madman who desired nothing but to become stronger. However, Ling Han was completely unfazed by this. In fact, it was a pity that Zhao Qifeng had performed too poorly before. Otherwise, Ling Han wouldn't have minded sending him off with some dignity and respect. I won't die! Only you will die! Zhao Qifeng roared, with his eyes bloodshot. He fully unleashed his copper divine fetus, and his entire body transformed into a copper sword that was filled with mystical symbols. These were symbols of the great Tao that were at the celestial king tier. After sacrificing his life force to unleash this sword, he was finally able to release its brilliance. A murderous aura rose into the surroundings, and it was seemingly tangible as it circled around him. This allowed his destructive power to rise by another level. At this moment, Zhao Qifeng was confident that his destructive ability was unparalleled among those at the severing mundane tier. He was confident that no one could rival him. That being the case, how could Ling Han, someone who was also at the severing mundane tier, block his strike? Die! He charged forward, with his body transforming into a sword as he unleashed his most brilliant and powerful attack. This sword flashed with a dazzling glow as it sliced through the sky, and this was a radiance so brilliant that it could even be seen from billions of kilometers away. It was as if this radiance would never dissipate. Boom! The formidable sword strike slashed down at Ling Han. Ling Han didn't dodge, and he simply raised a finger, pressing it toward Zhao Qifeng. He looked much like a mantis trying to stop a chariot in its tracks. The sword slashed down, and it erupted with a spectacular glow. Even the most powerful severing mundane tier cultivators couldn't see through this sword light. It was as if they had gone blind. When the sword light gradually dissipated, everyone could see that Ling Han's finger was raised slightly above his forehead, pressed against the blade of the copper sword. It was clearly only one finger, yet it was much like a divine peak that could hold up the heavens. That had been a supremely powerful attack, yet Ling Han had managed to block it with only one finger. Chapter 1896 Not So Fast. Chapter 1896 Not So Fast. Zhao Qifeng was dazed as he stared at Ling Han, and his expression was as strange as could be. In his memory, Ling Han's battle prowess was only at a similar level to his. It was only because Ling Han's defensive ability was slightly more powerful that he had lost during their previous battle. Apart from that, he had possessed countless opportunities to defeat Ling Han during their first battle. This time, however, the gulf between their battle prowess was astonishing. He had unleashed his pinnacle attack, yet Ling Han had blocked it with just one finger. Moreover, he was extremely calm and composed, and it was as if he were simply battling against some random dog or cat. This caused him to think of Yan Xianlu. Before Yan Xianlu had advanced to the fifth severance, he had also been as weak and fragile as could be before him. What supreme prodigy! He was nothing but an insect. Was this brat going to become the second Yan Xianlu? His mind whirred, yet the flesh on his face started to peel off bit by bit. There was no blood, and it was as if he had truly transformed into copper. However, he was decaying copper right now, and it was because of this that he was falling apart. He had unleashed his pinnacle strike just then. If he succeeded, he would ascend to a new height. If he failed, however, he would never be able to recover. The copper started to disintegrate into dust, flying into the distance with the wind. Everyone fell silent. No one could refute Zhao Qingfeng's power. He was a prodigy even more powerful than many holy sons and holy daughters of celestial King Tier forces. Now, however, he had died, such a worthless death. Indeed, he couldn't even draw a single drop of blood from Ling Han. Zhao Qifeng opened his mouth to speak his final words. "You're indeed very powerful. I admit my loss. However, you're definitely no match for Lord Holy Sun. I'm going to die soon, but you won't live for much longer. With your personality, you definitely won't submit to the Holy Sun. However, the Holy Sun definitely won't allow such a thing to happen." As he said this, his movements became slightly exaggerated, and this caused the surrounding wind to pick up speed. When he finished speaking, his entire body disintegrated into pieces that blew away with the wind. The life force that belonged to him vanished without a trace. There was no more Zhao Qifeng in this world. A smile spread across Ling Han's face. Regardless of whether Zhao Qifeng was warning him or cursing him, this didn't affect his Dao heart in the least. In a battle of equal levels, he wouldn't be afraid of anyone. So what if Yan Xianlu was powerful? He would be nothing more than a stepping stone in his path of seeking Dao. He would help Ling Han ascend to a new level. Grandmaster Ziqing also smiled upon seeing this. Although Zhao Qingfeng's death was a significant matter, the Eternal Prosperity Sect also had to speak reason, no? Even if Yan Xianlu didn't speak reason, he was only a holy son, a mere severing mundane tier holy son. Time. What his disciple needed was time. As long as he had enough time, he would be able to peer down at the entire world. "Hey, let's continue," Alchemist Ziqing said. Although an unexpected interruption had occurred, this had instead helped to solidify Ling Han's position. Of course, he would definitely conduct a thorough investigation once this ceremony was over. He would find who had let Zhao Qingfeng out. "Not so fast," another person suddenly shouted. "Fuck! What was going on today? Why was everyone seeking to interrupt the ceremony?" An old man stepped forward from the crowd of spectators. His hands were clasped behind his back, and he was radiating with a powerful aura. "Lu Jin!" Grandmaster Ziqing said with a frown. Lu Jin was a 3-star alchemist. However, he also had another identity, was an ascending origin tier elite. Thus, Lu Jin was extremely arrogant and self-important, and he didn't really listen to others. Moreover, he was indeed a talented alchemist, and he had the potential to become a 4-star alchemist. However, to suddenly step forward at this moment, this caused Alchemist Ziqing to become extremely displeased. He wouldn't mind using his power as chairperson to kick Lu Jin out from the ceremony. Lu Jin clasped his hands and said, "Chairperson." His expression was haughty, and it was clear that he didn't hold much respect for Grandmaster Ziqing. Everyone gasped upon seeing this. Just then, Zhao Qifeng stepping forward was already a very big issue. Now, another person in Lu Jin was stepping forward? Perhaps Alchemy City was going to experience some unexpected change? What's wrong? Alchemist Ziqing asked in displeasure. Lu Jin was definitely stepping forward at this moment on purpose. However, he was a 3-star alchemist, and he was more so an ascending origin tier elite, so Alchemist Ziqing definitely had to give him some face. I have an important matter to report, Lu Jin said loudly. His voice was like booming thunder. Under the might of an ascending origin tier elite, Ling Han's radiance was instantly swept away. What's the matter? Do you have to report it now? Alchemist Ziqing asked in a baleful voice. If Lu Jin couldn't give him a good reason, he would definitely give him a good beating. A smile tugged at the corners of Lu Jin's lips, and he said, Because of this matter, this measly Holy Sun ceremony can be tossed aside. What an arrogant tone! Alchemy City had invited numerous forces to this ceremony. Not only were countless 3-star forces present, but there were also many 4-star forces present. They were all here for the Holy Sun ceremony. Yet Lu Jin was claiming that this ceremony could be tossed aside. How preposterous! Oh? Alchemist Ziqing couldn't be bothered speaking any more nonsense. He looked at Lu Jin, waiting for further explanation. If Lu Jin couldn't give a good explanation, he wouldn't need to give him any more face. It's because Lu Jin pointed at himself, and his voice became countless times louder as he said, I've already advanced to become a 4-star alchemist. 4-star alchemist, 4-star alchemist, 4-star alchemist. His voice echoed around the plaza. Everyone was stunned upon hearing this. Only after several dozen seconds did someone finally gasp in deep astonishment. The plaza then descended into commotion. A 4-star alchemist! There were only 3 4-star alchemists in Alchemy City, and indeed, in the entire Eastern Celestial Realm. To become a 4-star alchemist was equivalent to becoming a Celestial King. Just what kind of concept was Celestial King? This was indeed a significant matter. Compared to this, crowning a new Holy Sun was indeed a measly matter of little importance. It was far too insignificant. Just then, Grandmaster Ziqing could still suppress Lu Jin using his status as chairperson and a 4-star alchemist. Now, however, their status was equal. A 4-star alchemist! This status was far too transcendent. If conflict occurred among the 4-star alchemists, it was extremely likely that this would result in the fracturing of Alchemy City. This was because there were far too few 4-star alchemists. Any one of them could create a supremely powerful force. Alchemist Ziqing faltered for a moment. He had many things to consider. Lu Jin advancing to become a 4-star alchemist and Zhao Qifeng suddenly advancing and stepping forward to challenge Ling Han. Right now, he could seemingly link these two matters together. This was no simple matter. However, he remained calm and composed. After living for so many billions of years, he could definitely keep his emotions under control. His voice was calm as he said, Do you have any proof? This is a 4-star celestial pill that I just finished refining 11 days ago. You guys can appraise it. Lu Jin flicked his finger as he said this. Whoosh! A streak of white light shot toward Alchemist Chuyi. He hadn't given it to Alchemist Ziqing, and he was instead giving it to Alchemist Chuyi. There was definitely something fishy about this. Alchemist Chuyi was currently enjoying wine from his calabash, and when the pill vial flew over, he casually reached over to catch it. A white pill vial appeared in his hand. At the same time, an expression of reluctance appeared on his face as he put his calabash down. He then opened the seal of the pill vial. This kind of celestial pill was far too valuable, and losing any iota of its aura would be a significant loss. Thus, it had to be stored in a sealed vial. Alchemist Ziqing and Alchemist Heavenly Heart both shuffled over to look at the vial. The surrounding spectators also stood on their tippy toes, hopeful that they could catch a glance. 1. The alchemical pill had yet to appear, yet a streak of azure aura had already risen into the air. This aura didn't dissipate in the sky, and it instead transformed into the figure of a small fox. Its eyes were extremely large, and it was as adorable as could be. Chapter 1897 Compromise. Chapter 1897 Compromise. Solemn expressions instantly spread across the faces of Grandmaster Zi Qing and the two other 4-star alchemists. The higher the level of an alchemical pill, the more phenomena it would exhibit. In terms of 4-star alchemical pills, their medicinal power transforming into the shape of a beast was an extremely normal phenomenon. No, this isn't medicinal power transforming into the shape of a beast. Rather, this is a celestial pill, Alchemist Heavenly Heart immediately said. He was a life form that had been born from a celestial pill, so he was extremely sensitive when it came to such alchemical pills. Alchemist Zi Qing and Alchemist Chu Yi were both given a fright. A celestial pill that could exhibit the shape of a life form. This wasn't an ability possessed by 4-star alchemists. Instead, this was an ability possessed by 5-star alchemists. No. Even ordinary 5-star alchemists couldn't achieve such a feat. Only those who had gathered countless years of experience and reached the pinnacle could achieve such a feat. How could a 4-star alchemist achieve this? However, a look of disappointment quickly spread across Alchemist Heavenly Heart's face, and he said, "The medicinal power has indeed taken the shape of a beast. However, this isn't a genuine life form. Instead, it's born from some symbol that has been purposefully inscribed into the pill. It's because of this that it appears like a genuine life form." He had initially thought that he had found a life form similar to himself. However, it turned out to be nothing more than a disappointment. Grandmaster Zi Qing reached over and channeled some kind of celestial technique. The small azure fox immediately reverted into an orb of energy. This was a celestial pill of gaseous form. "Azure Cloud Pill!" the three alchemists exclaimed in unison as they exchanged a glance. Among 4-star alchemical pills, the Azure Cloud Pill was the easiest to refine. Thus, when trying to advance to become a 4-star alchemist, most alchemists would choose to refine the Azure Cloud Pill. However, regardless of how easy it was to refine, it was still a 4-star alchemical pill. It was successfully refined less than 1 month ago. The 3 4-star alchemists could naturally determine this with ease. If they couldn't, there would be a failure of a 4-star alchemist. It was clear that Lu Jin hadn't found this alchemical pill from some random place, and then dishonestly claimed it as his own. Alchemist Zi Qing resealed the pill vial, and tossed it back to Lu Jin before saying, "This is indeed a 4-star alchemical pill. Congratulations on becoming a 4-star alchemist, Brother Lu. This is great news for Alchemy City." He laughed heartily and said, "Today is a day of 2 celebrations. Not only have we gained a new 4-star alchemist, but we're also gaining a new and talented holy son." His reaction was extremely quick, and he more so mentioned Lu Jin's breakthrough before Ling Han's crowning. This was because he understood that by stepping forward now, Lu Jin was definitely targeting Ling Han. Of course, to target a measly 1-star alchemist and a severing mundane tier cultivator as a 4-star alchemist was definitely overkill. In reality, Lu Jin was most likely targeting Alchemist Zi Qing. At their level, conflicts would appear extremely peaceful and calm on the surface. In reality, however, there would be shadows and projections of blades flittering around everywhere. Countless people might be affected. Lu Jin waved his hand and said, "Brother Zi Qing, you've already been the chairperson for almost 300 billion years, right?" Thump. Alchemist Zi Qing's heart thumped upon hearing this, and his gaze instantly became intense. "Indeed. Your memory is fairly good. According to the rules of Alchemy City, the position of chairperson needs to be changed once every 300 billion years," Lu Jin said as he continued to stare at Grandmaster Zi Qing. "I suggest that we immediately choose a holy son to become the successor." He was forcing Alchemist Zi Qing to abdicate. Alchemist Zi Qing came to a sudden realization. No wonder Lu Jin had stepped forward with such conviction and resolution. As it turned out, he was targeting his position as chairperson. Such a rule did indeed exist in Alchemy City. One could only act as chairperson for 300 billion years. When the time came, they would have to abdicate and pass their position on to someone else. In reality, there were still around 250 million years until the time limit of 300 billion years. This was enough time for Alchemist Zi Qing to nurture Ling Han. Moreover, under normal circumstances, who would dare to challenge him and force him to choose a successor? Alchemist Heavenly Heart and Alchemist Chu Yi didn't give a toss about this, so Alchemist Ziqing could naturally take his time to make a decision. However, Lu Jin's sudden advance to become a 4-star alchemist gave him the right to force Alchemist Ziqing to make a decision. Why did he insist on doing this? One had to realize that even though he had become a 4-star alchemist, his status was still far inferior to that of Alchemist Ziqing. That being the case, why did he insist on offending Alchemist Ziqing? This was because Lu Jin also had another identity, was Lu Xianming's master. As such, his actions were indeed targeted at Ling Han. However, targeting Ling Han wasn't his ultimate aim. Instead, the position of chairperson was his ultimate aim. If they were to choose a holy son to become the successor now, this would naturally have nothing to do with Ling Han. After all, without completing this ceremony, he couldn't be regarded as a holy son. That being the case, what right would he have to be considered? Taking a step back, even if Ling Han had the right to be considered, how could he surpass the other holy sons? He had only just become a 1-star alchemist, so did he even know how to perform spirit refinement? This was a vicious attack, and it was also an attack of extreme coincidence. If Lu Jin hadn't coincidentally become a 4-star alchemist at this time, his threat would have been absolutely useless. Anyhow, if one wanted to become a holy son, they would first have to receive acknowledgement from all of the 4-star alchemists. Thus, he only had to object to prevent Ling Han from becoming a holy son. At that time, Lu Xianming would have the greatest chance of becoming the successor. For the sake of his disciple, and more so for the position of chairperson, Lu Jin was truly giving it his all. "I have my own plans for selecting a successor," Grandmaster Ziqing said with displeasure. Lu Jin had only just become a 4-star alchemist, yet Ziqing had already raised 3 4-star alchemists. Thus, how could Alchemist Ziqing pay much attention to Lu Jin? They were both 4-star alchemists, yet they were at different levels in terms of spirit refinement. Thus, the gulf between them was still extremely great. Then I resolutely object to Ling Han becoming a holy son," Lu Jin said with a shake of his head. "This young man is far too good at causing trouble. Not only has he killed 2 potential successors of Celestial King tier forces, but he even forced Zhao Qifeng to death just then, offending the Eternal Prosperity sect in the process. If we elevate him to the position of holy son, won't that be further provoking those Celestial Kings?" This wasn't untrue. However, the matter with Zai Bingyun and Luo Changfeng had already been almost completely resolved by Grandmaster Ziqing. Moreover, Zhao Qifeng had been released by none other than Lu Jin. Now, however, he was shifting all of the blame onto Ling Han. He was truly shameless to the core. Alchemist Ziqing's expression darkened, and his look of displeasure became even more intense. In fact, he wasn't appointing Ling Han to the position of holy son out of self-interest. Otherwise, which of his 3 previous disciples hadn't had the right to become his successor? However, Lu Jin? For the sake of his disciple, he was truly stooping as low as he could and giving up all face. However, Lu Jin did indeed have a great advantage. As long as he didn't agree, Ling Han could never become a holy son. As such, the power was in his hands. As long as he remained stubborn for 300 million years, Alchemist Ziqing would eventually have to abdicate. At that time, it was extremely likely that Lu Xianming would become the successor. Alchemist Ziqing gazed at Lu Jin, and Lu Jin gazed at Alchemist Ziqing. Their gazes were locked, and it was as if they were silently discussing something. After a brief moment, Grandmaster Ziqing said, "After 3 years, we'll pick a successor from among the holy sons and holy daughters." Hearing this, Lu Jin said, "I also agree to Ling Han becoming a holy son." The 2 powerful figures each took a step back to come to a compromise. On the surface, it appeared as if Lu Jin had gained a significant advantage. After all, what could Ling Han do in a measly 3 years? Even if he stayed in a time cultivation chamber every day, that would only be 300 years. How far could he grow? Could he compete with Lu Xianming? Meanwhile, this was also the most time that Alchemist Ziqing could buy. If he asked for any more, he would be risking a significant increase in unpredictable variables. Anyhow, Alchemist Ziqing had agreed to this time limit of 3 years because he was well aware of Ling Han's comprehension ability in alchemy. Only he knew that Ling Han had already succeeded in performing spirit refinement. After 3 years, Ling Han would most likely be a 2-star alchemist already. At the same time, he might have already reached the 2nd refinement. That being the case, he could then naturally compete with the other holy sons and holy daughters. Chapter 1898 Visitor from Thundercloud Palace. Chapter 1898 Visitor from Thundercloud Palace. After the 2 big shots had reached agreement, the ceremony thus continued to proceed. Ling Han swept an eye over Lu Jin, and turned to look back at the holy sons and holy daughters that were gathered. Among them, Lu Xianming was wearing a prideful smile. Ling Han involuntarily showed a smile filled with profound meaning. Did Lu Xianming think he was a sure winner? A mere 3 years, that was indeed not enough time to change anything for others. Even in the time cultivation chamber, it would only be 300 years. Wasn't wanting to achieve a great breakthrough in alchemy in a mere 300 years just a joke? But Ling Han had the reincarnation tree, and this was a supreme treasure that was crucial in turning the circumstances around. You, a minor character, can become conceited for a while, but I will soon deal with you. Ling Han did not take it to heart. In the first place, Lu Xianming did not have a single trait that was worth his serious notice. Of course, Ling Han could not just become a holy son so easily. He had to display his skill in alchemy. Not only would he have to answer various bizarre questions from some veteran alchemists, of course, they all had to deal with pharmacology, and Alchemy also had to concoct an alchemical pill in public in the end. After adequately proving his natural talent in alchemy, only then could he be considered to have passed the test, and finally begin the coronation. The process of coronation was extraordinarily solemn and dignified. Ling Han's name would be inscribed on the absolute beginning stone of Alchemy City, and when a new chairperson emerged from holy sons and holy daughters like them, the names of all others would be erased. Only one person could be listed on the name list of the generations of chairpersons, and the others would be replaced by the next generation of holy daughters and holy sons. After Alchemist Ziqing announced that Ling Han would be the 10th holy son of this generation of Alchemy City, an immortal Palace elite immediately moved, and began to write down Ling Han's name on the absolute beginning stone. It evolved from the Chaos Source Rock, and was incredibly hard. It was usually used to record glorious achievements. In the ancient realm, the absolute beginning stone was capable of absorbing all attacks, and only Genesis tier elites were capable of surpassing its limits and damaging it. After coming to the celestial realm, there were many more that could damage the absolute beginning stone, but it was still used for the purpose of recording events. But even for Immortal Palace tier, he still had to expend a great amount of effort and strength to inscribe a person's name on it word by word. Otherwise, there would not have been need for an Immortal Palace tier elite to move personally. This was not just a question of dignity. Hong, long, a loud ruckus rang out, and a hot cloud of volcanic ash surged at the horizon, and was presently surging over from afar very quickly. However, was this really volcanic ash? Why would it release a loud commotion like the earth quaking and mountains shaking? That Immortal Palace tier elite had been focused and concentrating on inscribing Ling Han's name initially, but with such a shock, his hand suddenly slipped, and the Ling in Ling Han's name was written at a skewed angle. Though it could still be distinguished as Ling, it was extraordinarily and incredibly hideous. This elite couldn't help but show an expression of fury. Didn't they see that he had been inscribing words? Who dared to shock him like this, and succeeded at that? Humph! Alchemist Ziqing involuntarily humphed loudly. He raised his head to look at the skies, and loudly called out, "Which clan is it that is so unruly? Could it be that this cloud of volcanic ash is an elite?" Everyone raised their heads and looked. The progress of the cloud of volcanic ash was especially quick. In a short while, it had already surged over. Even if there was still a very far distance away, and even if there were protective formations in place, everyone still felt a frightening wave of heat assail them, and felt a burning pain. Boom! The flames dissipated, and a colossal warship appeared, rapidly shifting from a quick charge to slowing down. Finally, it remained afloat in midair. There was shockingly a symbol of lightning on this warship. Thundercloud Palace! Alchemist Ziqing couldn't help but humph lightly, his voice exuding a strong displeasure, while his expression became very solemn. He had already paid a personal visit to the Thundercloud Palace and Zai clan, resolving the grudges that Ling Han had with these two forces. Though the two Celestial King tier-level forces were still very displeased with the fact that their heir had been killed in a fair battle, going by logic, they did not mobilize powerful figures to seek Ling Han out for vengeance. Since Alchemist Ziqing had already personally visited to make an apology, and had also given adequate compensation, and most importantly, the Rock Palace was really not easily to be trifled with, the two Celestial King tier-level forces agreed not to hunt down Ling Han further with much reluctance. In truth, if Alchemist Ziqing had not visited them, they would not have known that the two Ling Han were actually the same person. But now, the Thundercloud Palace had actually come. It was very coincidental. Lu Jin had just advanced to a 4-star alchemist, and almost ruined the matter of Ling Han becoming a holy son, and the Thundercloud Palace had come over now. There was definitely something off about this. Could it be that the two had colluded with one another? Alchemist Ziqing involuntarily glanced at Lu Jin. Lu Jin's expression was serene. Not the slightest bit of fluctuation could be seen from his expression. When one had reached this kind of cultivation level, and stood on this kind of height, they would naturally not reveal anything through their expression. Ha ha ha, I did not miss the occasion, right? A loud holler rang out, and a burly man walked down from the skies. He traversed a few miles with every step, and in 3 or 4 steps, he had already descended onto the plaza. This naturally incited the attack of the formations in the city, but when they landed on that person, it only created a series of brilliant sparks, yet had no way at all to wound that person in the slightest. Ba Yao! Alchemist Ziqing's eyes tensed, showing a strong hint of wariness. Just like how there were 1st refinement, 2nd refinement, 5th refinement, and 7th refinement among 4-star alchemists, it was naturally the same for cultivation. This Ba Yao was one of the few ascending origin tier elites of the Thundercloud Palace. When he was young, he had been a holy son, and after advancing to the ascending origin tier, he became one of the elders of the Thundercloud Palace. In the past, he was already incredibly aggressive, and defeated a great many holy sons and holy daughters of other Celestial King tier-level forces, and was recognized to have a sliver of hope of becoming a Celestial King himself. Unfortunately, tens of billions of years had passed, and he still plateaued at the ascending origin tier. However, as an ascending origin tier, he was definitely a top-tier existence in terms of battle prowess within the ascending origin tier, just like how there was 7th refinement and 8th refinement among 4-star alchemists, and had the title of being the strongest below the Celestial King tier. Of course, whether he was number 1 or not was merely the praise of some people towards him. In truth, who would know exactly how strong the strongest ascending origin tier was? Grandmaster Ziqing, Grandmaster Chu Yi, as well as Grandmaster Lu Jin. Ba Yao looked towards the 4 great alchemists, and as his eyes passed over one, he would address them. Finally, his eyes landed on Lu Jin, and he showed a smile. Both alchemists Ziqing and Ling Han felt a jolt in their hearts. How did this Ba Yao know that Lu Jin had recently become a 4-star alchemist? Clearly, they had communicated with each other since long ago. This was no cordial visitor. So this is the outrageously bold Ling Han? Ba Yao did not concern himself with the reactions of the 4 great alchemists, but rather looked towards Ling Han, appearing to be absolutely unrestrained. He was also qualified to do that. In terms of battle prowess, he was already one of the very best in the ascending origin tier. Furthermore, Alchemy City could not produce celestial *** that could help him advance further. Thus, since he had no request for them, he could be forceful. He did not have to lower his voice and act humbly towards alchemists. This junior is indeed Ling Han. As for whether I am outrageously bold or otherwise, that would have to depend on whom I'm facing. Ling Han answered, neither servile nor overbearing. Gasp! Everyone was rendered speechless. This guy actually said being outrageously bold would have to depend on whom he was facing. You are already talking back to an ascending origin tier elite, and this could still not be considered as being outrageously bold? Hee hee! Ba Yao, on the contrary, began to laugh, and then laughed madly. All of a sudden, his laughter came to an abrupt halt as he looked at Ling Han menacingly. How dare you, violent criminal, actually kill the holy son of our sect? Though Grand Master Ziqing has spoken up on your behalf, and capital punishment can be cancelled, punishment is inevitable. You kneel! You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.